Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell.
Betty was still asleep. She had come home late the night before and said something about a friend's birthday party, though no one had asked her where she had been, but for some reason it seemed important to justify herself. Probably she remembered those times when her husband thought she was an ordinary girl who had no money or connections, but they were attracted to each other. Oh, those days are gone. Liam, as usual, took a contrast shower, wiped himself thoroughly with a towel, and began the most unpleasant part of his awakening. He leaned closer to the mirror, scrutinizing his reflection. This morning ritual had always been difficult for him, with fear. In fact, the tension grew with each passing year. Suddenly you will click the first marks of time on your own attractive face. What then? Good looks are everything, Liam used to say. True, it usually referred to work, because not fresh wrinkled flour is difficult to sell. You have to dodge to make them look freshly cut, but recently he more and more often repeated this simple truth in relation to himself. People are like flowers too. You have to work hard to keep them young and beautiful. Liam looked at himself again and grinned at his mirror double. Not bad, perhaps. He had bought another day against time. Good job, Liam. Way to go. Of course you can't hide your age. 40 is 40, and it's hard to look like a reverent young man, but it's for the best. After all, boys without mustaches are not trusted, neither in work nor in relationships. Even girls, yesterday's schoolgirls proudly declare that they like older men, but right, older, it is in their understanding smarter, more reliable, well, and with money, of course. In general, quite a reasonable choice, a man in his prime. Here he is in the pair itself. All the features of his face have retained clarity without becoming coarse. The contours are in order. The color of his face is fresh. This is, of course, the merit of an excellent beautician, but he himself is also good. Regimen, discipline, and zero indulgence to himself, that's it, the secret of his youth. Does not drink. Forced himself to say goodbye to cigarettes, plus a healthy diet, good sleep, and regular exercise. Sometimes, of course, you want to send all that correctness away. Eat a lot of junk food, drink a beer. You can't. His job is to look good, so healthy lifestyle, beautician, and of course, hairdresser. At the thought of the latter, Liam pulled himself a strand of hair to assess the condition of the roots. Yes, his freshly chalked hair had already grown out. It was time to visit the hairdresser. The usual, Liam? Lauren chirped. To her, and only her, Liam trusted his hair for the 5th year. Don't ask, Lauren. You know better than I do. He answered, giving the barber one of his most charming smiles. Just don't overdo it, okay? It should look natural, like you've been sunbathing on the beach and your hair is slightly burned out. Remember? I remember, my good man, I remember. Lauren ruffled his hair. Let's start with a deep clean. What's up, sweetie? He waved his hand tiredly. Oh, Lauren, how can I be doing with a job like this? Those who claim it's easy to live off women are either brazen liars or simply don't know what they're talking about. He considered his job to be one of the most difficult in the world and was ready to argue about it with anyone who disagreed. For some reason, everyone thinks that being married to a wealthy, well-groomed lady is Jack's sweat of a lifetime. But Liam knew very well that these ridiculous rumors were spread by those who didn't know the real truth. Liam's wife Betty was wealthy. She had her ex-husband to thank for that, who had not gotten greedy in the divorce, and beautiful enough for her advanced age. But Liam, being with such a lady, who provided him with an excellent paying job, lived in eternal fear that if he got bored with his beautiful wife, she would easily replace him with someone else, which meant that he would fly out of her luxurious apartment penniless. The prospect is hurtful and humiliating, so whether he wanted it or not, Liam found himself included in the pursuit of attractiveness. Cosmetologists, massage therapists, fitness trainers, all of this has long been a familiar, albeit expensive, part of his life. But external attractiveness is not enough. Liam has learned how to give beautiful compliments without repeating himself. He perfected the art of love and even learned to watch with his wife her favorite melodramas, and still, every day he began with anxiety for the future, which was uncertain as well as the present. They say teenagers are driven by hormones, and that's why they have a bad temper, nasty to the extreme, but 17-year-old Thomas was an unusual teenager. At least that's what Helen, a charmingly slutty neighbor of about 35 who was despised by all married women, always told him. Mainly, of course, for the fact that it was she, the shameless and promiscuous Helen, that their husbands looked up to. The arrival of shameless Helen in their house was a real event. No one wanted to miss it, and the neighbors poured into the yard under various pretexts. Someone pretended that he urgently needed to wash his car, someone that it would be good to dust the carpets. Others just sat down on benches to chat and exchange news, but it was all just an act. In fact, everyone wanted to know what the new neighbor looked like, especially since rumors were spreading at the speed of light in their tiny town. Some noticed the strange woman in the store, others saw her strolling along the waterfront. So far, everyone knew only one thing: the stranger was young, beautiful, and excitingly lonely. At any rate, everywhere she appeared alone. When it turned out that the empty apartment on the second floor was finally rented out, no one had any doubts about who would move in. Thomas had only seen such a frenzy during the May holidays, when neighbors gathered all over the world, first at dachas for shish kebabs, and then for parades. Then people were just as concentratedly scurrying back and forth on the stairs, wives shouting something to their husbands from the balconies, and husbands crowding around, discussing important matters, how much meat and booze to take to the dacha to be sure to have enough. Thomas never thought that such a pre-holiday fuss could arise in quite, as it seemed to him, prosaic reasons, like the arrival of a new neighbor. But first of all, the furniture was being hauled by some men who didn't look like movers. Their clothes were too neat, and it was clear from their conversations that they were just helping their good acquaintance. Secondly, the new neighbor came in a tiny turquoise-colored car, with some intricate airbrush on the doors, whether paradise was depicted there, or just some tropics, the ocean shore, the setting sun. And thirdly, when this very door with the painted paradise opened, some absolutely alien person, boyishly slender, with long blonde hair, braided in an unusual, slightly disheveled braid, came out of the cabin. The tips of her hair were dyed in a fierce pink color, and the girl, who at first glance seemed to be a girl, waved her hand cheerfully to her new neighbors and shouted cheerfully, "Good morning." Yes, she is about 30 years old, if not more. Thomas's mom gritted her teeth. She stood in the yard, not far from her son, and pretended that she was just out for some fresh air. "How do you know?" Thomas whispered in surprise, "Look at the wrinkles." "Where?" "Under her eyes, you fool. When he smiles, his skin folds up like a crocodile's, and he's got freckles on his nose, you hillbilly." Thomas carefully looked at her face and did not see anything crocodile in it. If she had wrinkles, no one noticed them, but she smiled really well, openly and very warmly, and even freckles did not spoil this sunny impression. On the contrary, they even strengthened it, because if the stranger had a perfectly porcelain skin, it would be difficult to perceive her as a living woman, not a work of art. And the crocodile took her backpack out of the car, threw it on her shoulder, and walked lightly to the entrance. On her feet, as Thomas noticed, were snow-white sneakers. The men turned to follow her, but quickly came to their senses when they heard their wives hissing in displeasure. The hissing did not subside even after a week since the Apocal event. It was said that there was a brave man who dropped in on the new girl and offered to help her if she needed it. The pretty neighbor politely thanked the brave man and offered him a cup of tea and crumpets, but then some neighbor appeared on the landing. In a minute the wife of the desperate was already here, and the neighbors behind the locked doors listened for a long time to the shrieking and selected swear words. The essence of them, of course, was to censure unscrupulous women who had no husband and could not have one, and therefore offered tea to other people's spouses. They also censured men's malleability and promiscuity, because of which any lousy goat is ready to exchange his faithful and respectable wife for the first girl he sees. The scratch marks on the daredevil's face, as well as the impressive black eye, served as a warning to the others for a long time. The new neighbor did not comment on the situation, which made her even more famous as a brazen seductress. All that was learned, the name of this mysterious person was Helen, and she was apparently unmarried. There were different rumors about her. Someone said that shameless Helen in her youth was a prostitute and from the elite, and by 27 and 30 accumulated a hefty sum, which will allow her to live to old age without needing anything. This version was especially liked by women because it allowed them not to envy the neighbor, but to treat her with some leniency. Others assured that she still had some super-rich patron who gave her a decent monthly allowance. This version was less common, if only because there had never been any super-rich patrons in their town, and if there had been, they would have preferred to send their favorites away from here to avoid being the subject of gossip. But as was usually the case, no one knew for sure. The human hive was buzzing, inventing more and more crazy versions. The degree of hatred was rising, and it seemed to Thomas very strange. After all, Helen behaved very modestly, never once even tried to flirt with other men's husbands. But when going to the store, she always asked her neighbors if they needed anything. When a lonely neighbor, retired Betty, broke her femoral neck and spent almost a month in the hospital, it was shameless Helen who visited her with bags of goodies. And she also took to the veterinary clinic a stray backyard cat that had been seriously mauled by dogs. The cat needed surgery, and Helen paid for it without saying a word, and then took the poor cat to herself. Thomas, then a 16-year-old boy, observing the discontent of neighbors, only marveled. Why were they so unfair to this beautiful and kind woman? Especially women were fierce about it, and after thinking about it, Thomas came to the conclusion that it was all about ordinary human envy. Their house, their neighborhood, although considered one of the most prosperous in the city, but in fact there lived the most ordinary people. Women who were young and had first love got married at the age of 18 or 20. By the time they were 24, they had a couple of kids. At 27, they thought they were already out of circulation. They had tired eyes and early coarsened hands. They were used to thinking first of their children, then of their husbands, and only last of themselves. These women were young and beautiful, bent under the burden of self-denial, discarded in a kind of pagan fanaticism everything that they considered superfluous and too costly: beauty, youth, health. By 30 they had already blurred, changed into tracksuits for a long time, and tied their dull hair, which had lost its luster, into ugly bunches. They were, in general, glorious women. They loved their loved ones and dreamed of a better life for their children. Only one thing nature had not measured them for: a sliver of normal human selfishness. It was completely unnoticed as long as everyone around them was like themselves, but when the shameless Helen appeared in the house with her insultingly contented smile, gentle hands, and groomed hair, the women became offended. It became even more offensive when it turned out that shameless Helen was not 25, but 10 years older. And they did not realize that Helen was beautiful, not in spite of them, but simply because she was used to spending time and money on herself. Helen wore youthful clothes, and the most unpleasant thing was that they suited her. Helen had no children or nephews, and when tired young mothers dragged their sleepy children to kindergarten, Helen walked her French bulldog Curabier on a leash, and Helen never carried poodle bags from supermarkets. And never once did she look glum, resentful, or tired, which was a shame because it turned out that she didn't have to devote herself entirely to others and forget about herself. I hate her, such a slut. Thomas's mother panted, frantically ragging the windows with a rag. Thomas knew that if his mother was cleaning the windows, she was in a bad mood, to say the least. Usually she left this tedious task to her husband or son, and if she did it herself, that was it. His father had a premonition of bad weather and tried to sneak out to the garage early in the morning. Thomas' nature in such an unmistakable flare denied, so that had to watch the mother explosions of resentment and if possible try to dispel them. Judging by the way his mother was furiously rubbing the window pane, it was not going well. And of course, the sight of shameless Helen carelessly walking her Curabier did not add to her good mood. No worries, no troubles, and plenty of money. Why not take care of her beauty? Her clothes are so light, but how can you wear them in our dust? Only if you take them off at home and throw them in the garbage, because the closets are full of new ones. Oh, old fool, she's still at it, jumping around like a goat. Ah, it's disgusting to look at her. Thomas glanced cautiously out the window from behind his mother's shoulder. The neighbor was indeed dressed in a tight white t-shirt and pink jeans, rolled up at the ankles. Her sneakers were still the same defiantly white, standing out against the green grass. Thomas liked the tight t-shirt best of all, and it wasn't that the neighbor's shape was so strikingly large, but rather the opposite. The size could have been added, but it was so nice to see the chiseled shoulders, the flexible waist, and the tanned skin in the low neckline. Even from afar, it seemed that Helen gave off a wonderful smell of purity and some young freshness. "Get away from me. What are you looking at?" Her mother noticed Thomas staring at the woman and waved the rag at him. "Get out of here. She's not the one to seduce the children, you wretch. Why do you all hate her so much?" Thomas couldn't take it anymore. "What's she doing wrong? She lives and lives. What does she live on?" Instantly the mother parried. She turned to her son, and her face breathed such a fierce, unconcealed hatred that Thomas was frightened for a moment. "Hadn't you thought of that? She doesn't go to work. She doesn't have a husband, but she has men coming and going, sometimes 2 in one day. Do you understand now how she earns her bread?" She looked hopefully at her son, expecting to see disgust or indignation on his face, or preferably both, but Thomas disappointed her. He shrugged indifferently and turned away from the window. "But he earns money. That's a job too, Mom." He reached out to take the rag from her. "You go get some rest, and I'll clean the window myself." "Yeah, you've got another idea." Mother snorted. "You don't want to clean the windows. You want to look at that shameless girl. That's all I need. Go and get some bread and a bottle of sunflower oil." Thomas obediently went into the hallway and found his dusty sneakers in the shoe rack. Once they were trivial white, but now they were striking unusual grayish-brown coloring, which means to walk on the city dust. Not every city has such, but they have, you can say, a business card of the settlement. Thomas slowly walked down the stairs, thinking about the conversation with his mother, about how little interesting things happen in their town if a pretty woman becomes a subject of increased and aggressive attention at the same time. And most of all, he thought about the white t-shirt of his neighbor. He wondered how she managed to wear white in this beastly dust. With Helen, he bumped into her right at the very entrance. Kurabir looked up at Thomas with bright, round eyes and yapped in greeting. "Hello, Kurabir," said Thomas, and bent down to pet the funny little animal. He wanted to say something to his mistress, but he wanted to say something witty, something that would surprise her or make her laugh, but nothing came into his head, so he had to limit himself to mumbling. "Hello. Hello, Thomas," she smiled warmly. "Aren't you going to the store that way?" He brightened up. "Can I get you anything?" "If you say the word, I'll be right back." "Get me some salt," the woman asked. "Let me give you some money now." No. Thomas was getting restless. "I don't want money, but if you offer me tea, I'll take it." "Then I've already offered it," she answered, and in Thomas's ears, these words sounded like wonderful music. He never heard Helen, amazed at the speed with which he had sprinted out of the entryway, muttered. If, of course, it was safe to do so, but Thomas was flying on wings to the store, thinking only that in 20 minutes he would be having tea with the most charming woman he had ever seen in his 15-year life. On this occasion, he made a promise to himself that from now on and forever he would consider himself lucky. He would get what all men from 14 to 90 could only dream of, and maybe even today would be the end of his childhood, because if his mother was telling the truth, Thomas was not a slacker on vacation, and he had worked almost all summer as a courier, so his savings could be enough, if, of course, she agreed. At the mere thought, his heart rate was giving out in such a way that Thomas seriously feared he would collapse unconscious right in front of Helen's apartment door. His palms were getting traitorously damp, and his back was already wet with sweat. Hell, if this was going to work out, he'd have to shower first thing. He rang the bell. Helen opened the door immediately, and Thomas was stunned to see her in her house clothes. His mother, like the mothers of all his friends, wore bathrobes at home, or at best some shapeless pajamas, which they proudly called homemade suits. Such suits looked good only on the day of purchase, and then on mannequins, and on ordinary women thin jersey, emphasized all the imperfections, loose hips and weeping, lost elasticity belly. And the neighbor was wearing a beautiful blue with a white ruffle sundress, tied at the waist with a beautiful blue ribbon. Her hair was carelessly pinned at the back of her head, leaving a few strands of it loose around her face. Where did she come from? "I brought you some salt," Thomas stammered, at the thought that everything forbidden, adult, would happen now. Everything inside him froze. Helen smiled and stepped aside to let him into the apartment. I had already set the table. In the hallway at the feet of the guest, rolled out from somewhere a fat, funny-looking Kurabir. Thomas, blushing painfully, followed the hostess into the kitchen. Once inside the coveted apartment alone with this vicious, jubilant woman, he was completely confused. Just a minute ago, it seemed that he should only get here and everything would happen by itself, but now, he wondered, they would have tea, and then what? How does it happen with women like that? Do you have to tell her why you're here? Or maybe she'll figure it out on her own. And how do you negotiate the price? What if it's too high? What if he doesn't have that much? And most importantly, how to make sure Helen didn't guess that she was his first. Thomas was tormented by these questions, while the neighbor was pouring tea and thinking about how wonderful it would be if this woman was, well, just a woman, not a prostitute, and that she just liked him that way. Then he would put his hands on her waist, her back to him now, and slowly kiss her bare neck, and maybe try it. And Thomas, trying to stop the trembling in his arms, came closer and put his arms around Helen's narrow waist. Now he could smell her perfume, thin, fresh, with some elusive bitterness. He wanted to lean forward to inhale it fully. Helen froze for a second, but immediately flinched when she felt his hot breath on her neck. "Get away," she said, "or I'll spill from the kettle." He obeyed immediately and immediately removed his hands. "I'm sorry," he mumbled. "I feel either offended or ashamed. It's just that people say that about you. That I'm a prostitute and men come to me." "Calm down," she said. Helen, sitting down. "I know, sit down." Thomas sat down and picked up a cup. Helen's tea was special too. It smelled of some strange herbs and familiar lemon, and for some reason a little chocolate candy. "It's not true what they say," he said. "Gossip, they always lie." The woman shrugged. "But men do come to see me," she said without the slightest embarrassment. "Only they have a different interest in me." Thomas looked at her with interest. Slowly his composure returned. "Do you really sell moonshine?" he asked in surprise. Helen laughed. Her teeth were like pearls, large, even, shiny. "No, Thomas," she said. "I'm a dressmaker. I make men's suits. I used to work in an atelier, but I make more money this way. Would you like to see? Come on." She led him into a room where there were several mannequins. One of them had an orange centimeter tape around his neck, and in the middle of the room was a table covered with patterns. By the window, where there was more light, was a sewing machine. "Oh my God," Thomas blurted out. "Is it really that easy?" Helen took the centimeter and deftly rolled it up. "You see how it is," she said. "They say a hell of a lot of things, but in fact it's very, very simple, boring even. Have you seen the movie with Monica Bellucci, calls Melina herself? It's also about such things, about gossip. Watch it if you want. It's interesting." Thomas left his neighbor's apartment thoughtful and sad, and it was not because the shameless Helen was not a mysterious priestess of love, but an ordinary worker. Just then he thought for the first time in his life about how evil people can be. And due to his young age, he did not realize that their anger is not from the heart, but from exhaustion, hopelessness, and constant spinning in a dull squirrel wheel. From then on, a sort of friendship developed between the 15-year-old boy and the grown woman. Thomas would often drop in for tea with Helen, and they would talk at length. Little by little, Thomas got to know her better, and now this woman's life and her journey became clearer to him. Helen had been born far away from here, in a lazy southern backwater where snow fell a couple of times during the winter and melted the next day. But there were apricot trees, and their sweet fragrance mingled with the bitter smell of wormwood. The stars on summer nights were so low that it seemed that you could reach out your hand and take a sparkle from the sky. Pin it on your dress like a brooch, and you'd be the prettiest girl on the street. "You know, Thomas," said Helen dreamily, "I sometimes think that's why I became a dressmaker. Because of this southern summer sky, I so dreamed of a dress the color of night, and that the star, here, on the shoulder, that even learned to sew because of it." The girl lived with her parents and grandmother, and then at her disposal was a small house with a front garden. Just her grandmother with age became hard to bear the heat, and then her parents decided to move her to the dacha. It was cooler there after all. In order not to leave the old lady alone, they moved there themselves, especially since Helen was not alone after all. Across the street lived her father's cousin, Uncle James and his wife, Aunt Clara, and their countless brood of 17 to 2-year-olds. At first, Helen found it a little scary to spend the night and to live it all alone in an empty house, but little by little she got used to it, and then she liked it. After all, there were many advantages to being free. In time, Helen even began to be proud of the fact that she was now, you could say, quite an adult, even living separately from her parents and not reporting to anyone where she went and what time she would return home. Moreover, there was always somewhere to go. You could go to visit any of the neighbors and sit up late talking. Or, if your soul wanted silence and solitude, you could take a walk along the seashore. And just during one of such walks, Helen met her lion. It was late fall, she recalled, and it was windy, the sky was dark as before a storm, seagulls were scurrying back and forth, shouting at them. And suddenly I saw him sitting on the rocks, long, curly, and thin, as if he hadn't eaten for a month. His eyes were big, you couldn't see from the light. His eyelashes were so long and thick, you could paint pictures of him, and he was a romantic, reading a book, and the wind was ruffling the pages. It's not true what they say, he said. Gossip, they always lie. The woman shrugged. But men do come to see me. She said without the slightest embarrassment, only they have a different interest in me. Thomas looked at her with interest. Slowly his composure returned. Do you really sell moonshine? He asked in surprise. Helen laughed. Her teeth were like pearls, large, even, shiny. No, Thomas, she said. I'm a dressmaker. I make men's suits. I used to work in an atelier, but I make more money this way. Would you like to see? Come on. She led him into a room where there were several mannequins. One of them had an orange centimeter tape around his neck, and in the middle of the room was a table covered with patterns. By the window, where there was more light, was a sewing machine. Oh my God, Thomas blurted out. Is it really that easy? Helen took the centimeter and deftly rolled it up. You see how it is, she said. They say a hell of a lot of things, but in fact, it's very, very simple, boring even. Have you seen the movie with Monica Bellucci, Calls Melina Herself? It's also about such things, about gossip. Watch it if you want. It's interesting. Thomas left his neighbor's apartment thoughtful and sad. And it was not because the shameless Helen was not a mysterious priestess of love, but an ordinary worker. Just then he thought for the first time in his life about how evil people can be. And due to his young age, he did not realize that their anger is not from the heart, but from exhaustion, hopelessness, and constant spinning in a dull squirrel wheel. From then on, a sort of friendship developed between the 15-year-old boy and the grown woman. Thomas would often drop in for tea with Helen, and they would talk at length. Little by little, Thomas got to know her better, and now this woman's life and her journey became clearer to him. Helen had been born far away from here, in a lazy southern backwater where snow fell a couple of times during the winter and melted the next day. But there were apricot trees, and their sweet fragrance mingled with the bitter smell of wormwood. The stars on summer nights were so low that it seemed that you could reach out your hand and take a sparkle from the sky. Pin it on your dress like a brooch, and you'd be the prettiest girl on the street. You know, Thomas, said Helen dreamily. I sometimes think that's why I became a dressmaker. Because of this southern summer sky, I so dreamed of a dress the color of night, and that the star, here, on the shoulder, that even learned to sew because of it. The girl lived with her parents and grandmother, and then at her disposal was a small house with a front garden. Just her grandmother with age became hard to bear the heat, and then her parents decided to move her to the dacha. It was cooler there after all. In order not to leave the old lady alone, they moved there themselves, especially since Helen was not alone after all. Across the street lived her father's cousin, Uncle James and his wife, Aunt Clara, and their countless brood of 17 to 2-year-olds. At first, Helen found it a little scary to spend the night, and to live it all alone in an empty house, but little by little she got used to it, and then she liked it. After all, there were many advantages to being free. In time, Helen even began to be proud of the fact that she was now, you could say, quite an adult, even living separately from her parents and not reporting to anyone where she went and what time she would return home. Moreover, there was always somewhere to go. You could go to visit any of the neighbors and sit up late talking. Or, if your soul wanted silence and solitude, you could take a walk along the seashore. And just during one of such walks, Helen met her lion. It was late fall, she recalled, and it was windy. The sky was dark as before a storm. Seagulls were scurrying back and forth, shouting at them. And suddenly I saw him sitting on the rocks, long, curly and thin, as if he hadn't eaten for a month. His eyes were big. You couldn't see from the light. His eyelashes were so long and thick. You could paint pictures of him, and he was a romantic, reading a book, and the wind was ruffling the pages. I thought he was reading poetry, but he looked at me and smiled. And that's when a 17-year-old girl fell in love for the first time. As always, at that age, without thinking, without calculating, and it seemed forever. I thought it was the end of my freedom as a girl. What kind of freedom is there when you're in love like that? Only to get married. Liam, however, did not share her zeal. It seemed to him that Helen's ideas about life were too simple and uncomplicated. The boy was ambitious and decided that his place was in the big city. "That's where the future is, Helen," he said, kissing his beloved's flaxen hair. "We can't stay here. We'll be like Uncle James and Aunt Clara." "Is that what you want?" Helen shuddered at the words. Uncle James was a frail man, barely over 40, but looking a shabby 50. Alcohol and lack of demand were to blame. He'd once worked at a horse club, and no one was better at getting along with any horse, even the most stubborn. He taught kids to ride and was paid handsomely for his skills. But then one of the local bosses bought the club and offered Uncle James to teach riding to his fat friends. Uncle James couldn't bring himself to accept. He hated the suddenly rich, yesterday's hooligans with whom he grew up on the same street, but only they suddenly, out of the blue, suddenly began to build themselves whole palaces, although yesterday they were caught shoplifting. So Uncle James was out of work and started drinking. His wife, Aunt Clara, was rumored to have been beautiful once, but it was impossible to see the former beauty in the now immense aunt, with a large and dark wart on her nose. She had once worked in a cafe, but when she realized her husband would no longer find a living, she had taken up baking to order. Aunt Clara always wore huge robes covered in dough and cream stains. Her hands were always covered in flour, and her face was always bright red from the oven being on. The numerous screaming offspring of Uncle James and Aunt Clara, and from morning till night, there was no one to look after the children. In the evenings, Aunt Clara would come out on the threshold of the family home, sit down heavily on the porch, and sit so long. From the absent expression on her face, one could guess that she was simply enjoying these infrequent moments of peace and quiet. Then Uncle James came out, swaying, and gently touched his wife's loose shoulder. "Let's go to bed, Clara." Quietly, he would say, and the woman would rise from the porch and go into the house. Helen's heart clenched with pity for this haggard, tired woman who must have long ago forgotten that she was a woman and her own, unrelated to the family's welfare desires. The words I want had no place in her life. There used to be, of course, but they had been superseded, wiped out to blackness, and then to complete invisibility. There was only one solid thing going around. I must. When Helen tells the story, I went up to her one day and asked, "Aunt Clara, is there anything you need help with? While I'm on vacation, I can make you dough and roll it out thinly, and I'll make you a cream that you'll lick your fingers. Or do you want me to look after the younger kids? We'll go to the sea and swim, and you'll take it easy." And I'm saying all this, I realize I'm talking nonsense. It's not the right thing to do. It's wrong. I don't know how to do it right. And Aunt Clara looked at me as if she didn't immediately understand what I was saying, and then she grinned and said, "It is better to go out while you are young, but don't hurry to get married. You will always have time to go there. But from there." But I was a girl. I didn't listen to her. Helen's favorite boy soon rushed to a huge city and promised that in a year he would come and take her away. Letters from him came often at first, almost every day, then once every couple weeks, then once a month. He still promised that he would take Helen with him, but not as confidently as before. Then the letters had the feeling that Helen was for Liam, no longer the beloved girl he longed for passionately, but something of an obligation. Finally, without waiting for the year to end, Helen herself went to her lover to sort things out. But having arrived, she did not find him at the address indicated on the envelope. To be more precise, no one opened the door for her. The neighbor said that the boy is rarely at home. Helen sat on the steps for almost 24 hours waiting for her beloved. When Liam finally arrived, he was noisily happy to see the girl. "Shall we go home?" he announced. "What about it? You wanted opportunity, didn't you? You didn't want to be like Uncle James and Aunt Clara." The boy brushed it off. "I've realized a lot of things, Helen. I'd rather be like them than here, running around like a stray dog with no one to help you. At home, you walk down the street and everyone knows you. Whoever you go to will put you at the table and feed you well. But here, Helen, no one needs you. And people here are strangers, cold. You look like they're dressed well and don't talk stupidly, but their eyes are empty, like glass. And what did you agree to?" Thomas asked. "I did," Helen sighed. "And we went back to our streets, to our acquaintances, to Aunt Clara and Uncle James, married almost immediately." "Liam? His name was Liam, my husband, did I tell you?" "I guess he was happy. He got a job in a store selling beer on tap, made a decent living. Alcoholics, they'd give their last drink, so I didn't do nothing. I learned to sew well. We thought about children, but Liam thought, and for some reason I didn't want to hurry. Probably because I'd seen enough of Aunt Clara. Anyway, we lived peacefully, but a bit boring. It was a sleepy town, but when the season starts, then there's some excitement, and from fall to late spring it's boring. We're both at work during the day. In the evening we have dinner together, watch TV and go to sleep. On the weekends we go to the beach, if it's summer, or to the movies. And I'm so bored. I sit here in the evenings and think, even though I don't have kids, I'm just like my Aunt Clara. I also sit on the porch in the evening and look empty, because I know what will happen tomorrow and what will happen the day after tomorrow. I know that too, and the month after that too. So I realize that it is not in the children she trouble, and not even in the fact that the husband drinks and just routine eats, monotony and routine. I decided that it's time for us to leave here until completely rotten, but my no way, I just start talking, and he is already waving his hands at me. Don't start, I've already tried that. You're talking about boredom, but you've never seen real boredom. Nobody needs you there. You live like an anthill, and nobody cares about you. It's like that. Where I was born, therein came in handy. To make a long story short, but I'm stubborn. I'll be quiet for a week, and then I'll cast my fishing rod again. Sooner or later, and the fish will bite, and the man he is from the same fish in this regard, not so different. Be patient, and do not give up in the face of difficulties. Then sooner or later you will achieve your goal. I do not even remember how many times I have already asked Liam, let's try again. Let's move to a big city, and there are already 2 of us. It would be easier with 2, so I asked, and finally he agreed. We are packing, I remember, and suddenly Aunt Clara, but it never happened. She came to visit. She's looking at our bags, looking at them. I was waiting for her to drop a word, but she kept silent, sitting there drinking tea and watching me shoving the last one into the bags. And then he drank his tea, and then he said, "You're running from the wrong place, Helen, and to the wrong place." So she left without saying anything else, and I didn't think about her words. Why should I? At that time it seemed to me that I knew better where to run to and from. The next day we moved out. Liam's husband seemed to accept, but not cheerful, and I do not care. I think, well, here we are out of the swamp and crawled out. Now we will live. Of course, no one was waiting for us there, but it's kind of okay. I got a job in an atelier. My husband went to a computer hardware store as a consultant. He was even interested. He learned a lot of new things. It's not beer diluted with water. We seem to be living all right. There is no fun, but there is no boredom either. It's a different environment, different people. Yes, while you get to know the city, even that time will pass, and it's just that the people there are quicker, so they all run around, tearing their shoes off on the run. And the main thing is that they always have something to do, and we are used to living in such a relaxed way. Well, all in all, it wasn't bad. I, however, began to realize that my husband is not the same passion, and we with him spread out, or something, in different directions. Even in a simple thing, before under one blanket slept under one blanket, and it was good for us. But here we wrap each in his own, as you know, caterpillars, silkworms, and each in his cocoon sits. I even began to think that maybe it's really time for us to have a baby. We'll have such a common care. It also brings us closer, but I thought about it too long. I had to think faster, because the word of my spouse in this life, there are already quite other interests, not related to me. Rumors began to reach me, because my atelier was right in front of his store, and there on the first floor was a cafe, snack bar. Girls from the atelier ran there for snacks. They told me an amazing story that my virtuous husband had found someone. The girl, and he said, well, quite young, maybe 18 years old, and I was already 30. So it was a shame, wasn't it? Well, she was pretty, like a doll. I saw her. Her face was narrow, but her eyes were half her face and blue. It's creepy. It's such a pure color. Her lips are a bow. Her hair is red with gold, and it's long all the way down to her waist, shorter and curly. She's so beautiful. How could I compare to her? Thomas, admiring Helen, thought that she was in vain. He himself had never seen a woman who seemed more beautiful to him, but the neighbor continued. Liam, he went crazy about her. He would come home and look at me, but he couldn't see me. I try to say something to him, but he doesn't hear. Then he wakes up somehow, remembers that I'm here, looks at me and asks me in a surprised way, "Hey, did you say something?" Well, I tolerated it. Then once I went to my husband in the store, and there it means it. Well, she in general. She saw me, of course they were scared, but I'm a grown man. Why should I fight with a little girl? She had nothing to be scared of. Lime immediately picked himself up, thought, probably, that there would be a scandal now, but I took the girl aside and calmly told her, "Why don't you like yourself so much, little one? After all, you're so beautiful young, but with someone else's husband, is there no single guy for you in such a big city? Or do you think that Lime is walking away from me and you won't? And what about her?" Thomas asked. Helen smiled. "What about her?" she cried, of course, up to her swollen nose. Maybe she was ashamed, or maybe she was angry with him and me. I took her to that cafe on the first floor, got her a coffee and a cake. Well, I felt sorry for the girl. She made a mistake, so why blame her now? Who doesn't when they're young? So she calmed down, stopped sobbing, and then she told me. She said that Liam loves her, but it's understandable, and that he loves her too, and it's also understandable. But the next part was interesting. He said he wanted to leave, but he couldn't decide to leave me, because I didn't work and had never worked, and I didn't work because I was sick through and through, and he supported me. And then this miracle with a swollen nose says to me, "You're going to die soon anyway, so let him be happy." Liam told her in her ears that his sick wife had no more than a year to live, and then they would get married. So she came home, sat down and sat there. I don't know what to do. I was thinking about my home, and I was thinking about the fact that the apricots were probably ripe and sweet as honey. About how Aunt Clara can bake such baklava, I've never tasted better in my life. But the recipe, I was such a fool, I never asked her. For some reason I remembered Aunt Clara, the very same Aunt Clara. So I wanted to talk to her, at least to hear her voice. I don't know how I found her phone, so I called her. Aunt Clara recognized me at once and started asking me where I lived and how I was doing. But then, of course, I began to describe to her, and what a beautiful city it is here, and what a view I have from the window to die for, and that my husband and I live well, and there is plenty of work and a lot of money paid for it. In general, I lied Thomas, long and inspired, and during all this time Aunt Clara did not interrupt me once, and then waited until I closed my mouth for a minute. And then she went off without any preamble. "Now tell me the truth." Well, I had to tell the truth about my husband's Liam, about his beautiful mistress, and about what he told her about me, and I'm crying. I don't understand why I'm crying. It was not that I was offended that my husband had strayed, but the fact that I had been trying for my family for so many years, I had settled down somehow, and then a girl appeared, and I was to be thrown into the garbage. Like garbage? Aunt Clara says to me, "Do you remember I warned you? Don't be in a hurry, you're getting married. So you didn't listen to me and married the first one who looked at you. Come on, don't mention it now. If you love your husband, then don't care. He'll have a good time there, and then he'll come back to you. But I'm telling you right away, then he'll go off again, that's for sure. If you don't love him, pack your bags. You don't need him." Aunt Clara had always been like that, a little wordy. She didn't like long conversations, but if she said anything, it was always to the point. We said goodbye, I drank some valerian, went to bed, and I thought, do I love Liam or not? It turned out that it was unclear whether I loved him or not, but where could I put my habit? I definitely had a habit for him, a strong one, when it seemed that no, I was addicted to him. I couldn't tear him away from me. I shouldn't even try. I lay there falling asleep, and I didn't find the answers to my questions, so I fell asleep, all confused and torn. I woke up in the night from the fact that the silence is so silent that it seems to ring in the air. A taut string is felt, and it is already dark. My husband was sleeping next to me, and he couldn't care less. Everything seemed so mundane or trivial to me. It's like it's just the way it is. I'd even thought that maybe I was just dreaming. Helen was silent for a long time. And then, Thomas couldn't take it anymore. Did you never leave him? No, she answered, looking as if she was surprised at herself. I didn't. Lion woke up too, and we talked all night and into the morning. He apologized, told me more precisely, even swore that he had no true feelings for that girl, that it was just a joke, and that it would never happen again. He even offered to go home again, go back to a place where life was easier. I was not very much against it. I realized that here, it turns out, the matter is what, even in a big city or in a hut on the forest edge, and everywhere life is about the same. And if it's boring, it's because of us. So Aunt Clara was right when she told me that I was running to the wrong place. We slowly started to go home. We didn't want to hurry, and there was no need to. We decided that we'd be back just in time for Christmas. We'll clean our house. I'll cook delicious food. We'll sit down on our favorite sofa, and as before, we'll wrap ourselves in one blanket for two. We'll drink champagne and talk. I even imagined it, but it didn't quite work out. When we arrived, Aunt Clara was in black and couldn't stop crying. I went to her, and she told me that Uncle James, her husband, had died. He went to the sea drunk, as usual, to take a dip, and he drowned. That's how we spent Christmas at the memorial table. And then Aunt Clara told me that Uncle James, well, he was a difficult man, a surprise. He left the equestrian club, but he wrote down all his observations, developments, everything he knew about horses, what he had learned in notebooks. And the new owner of the club found them and decided to publish a textbook for those who are interested. And the textbook went viral, and this owner, and he was a decent man, came to Aunt Clara and said that all the uncles of James, posthumous royalties will be deducted to her, and the royalties there were not bad, believe me. At the wake this host was also there. I saw him then for the first time and was very surprised. For some reason I thought that there was such an old man nasty, but it turned out to be a normal man, even handsome. But the point is, we mourned our Uncle James and went on with our lives. It was hard for Aunt Clara. I went to see her every day, where I distracted her from her grief by talking, where I helped her with her eternal baking. Liam is at work again, diluting the beer, and then something happened to me. I don't even know how to describe it. I was walking home from work, and I felt like I was driving on a flat spot. I was leaning on a tree, and I could barely stand, I felt it. No, it's hard to stand. My head was spinning. The whole world was spinning in my eyes. I couldn't resist. I felt hot, even though the weather was cool that day, and I felt like I was standing under a hot shower. Then I sat right on the curb and tried to breathe deeply. Sitting was also difficult. I wanted to lie down, but I knew that if I lay down, I would pass out, but I was lucky. I saw a neighbor walking by, and he came running up to me, so scared. "Helen, are you ill? You look pale. Maybe an ambulance?" And I just shook my hand and pointed at my house. "Help me to get home." He took me all the way to the door. I kind of sat up. I got away. I went to the bathroom. At least I thought I'd rinse my face with cold water. It would be fresher somehow. And while I was walking, I remembered that I always had pregnancy tests, just in case. I thought I'd check it out, but it wouldn't hurt. I did everything that is required, put this stuff away so as not to be nervous, and I'm sitting on the edge of the bathtub, nervous. In front of myself, pretending I don't care. I pretend to wash my face, brush my teeth, comb my hair, and then it's time to look at the test. And of course, and there it is, 2 stripes, fat, clear rose. Rejoice, like Helen, you're a mom now, but I still can't understand. Not even to rejoice, but just to realize. Mom, I am now. What is it? What do I do now? Life will change, it's clear, but how it will change, and I need to tell my husband, after all, in general, I come out of the bathroom, the test in my hands, I hear Liam is already at home, on the phone with someone. Well and good, I think I'll make my husband happy. I sneak up on tiptoe in the room, so as not to make noise, and I can't think whether to tell him at once or just to show him the test. And suddenly I hear him, my husband, the same one who swore and swore his fidelity to me, saying to someone, "Why are you crying, kitten?" I had to go back, but you know I have a wife. The local climate suits her well, the doctors say so. But who am I to argue with doctors? They're not stupid, they know what they recommend. So we moved back, and then she wanted to come back here herself. She wanted to be buried in her homeland. It won't be long now. They've already found a place in the cemetery. And as soon as we bury her, we'll get married. And the main thing is that I'll get her house, and the summer house too. If you want to move here, you'll have everything ready. No, we'll sell everything here. Go to your place, buy an apartment and live. That's how it is. They're dividing my inheritance, and I was just about to congratulate my husband on becoming a father soon. I approached him from behind, and quietly said, "You can't wait, you bastard. And your woman won't wait for you, so pack your things and don't let me see you again." Liam jumped at my words. He's standing there with eyes like round, evil eyes. "You've got it all wrong. I'll explain everything. It's not true at all. You've heard it all." I didn't say that, and my eyes are running around, looking for something to grab onto. So he's standing there, shaking, afraid, and I'm laughing. Funny and light and easy, as if a huge stone had been lifted from my soul. I was even grateful to him for the setup. He finally took a breath, looked me in the eye, and smiled ingratiatingly, like a cat, which caresses, and he was thinking how to steal meat from the table. "Well, Helen, why did you forget all the good things at once? Have you fallen out of love with me?" That's when I realized I don't love him anymore. I don't love him anymore, and I felt so good. I'm standing there laughing, and I'm thinking, how happy I really am. I have a good job. I've got a place to live. I've got a child on the way. I've got rid of a scoundrel of a man. How bad is that? Anyway, I look at him silently, but inside I'm happy, and he suddenly says to me, "You've drunk my blood enough, and now you want to leave me without it? No way. If you want to go, go, but I'll stay here." I laughed again, and he ran out into the yard. I thought he was gone, but no, I was wrong. I hear footsteps. He goes into the house again, comes back with an axe in his hands and says to me, "Go away, or I'll kill you right here." And he looks so determined, but he's not giving or taking. And I was scared. I told him quietly, "Liam, quietly, I understand you." And I tiptoed past him, on my toes along the wall, and then I ran out of the house. Right across the street, I ran to Aunt Clara. She was about to go to sleep, but when she saw me, she fell asleep. She didn't make any noise, though. She's not that kind of person. She wrapped her shawl around me and said, My pie is still hot." She brought me to the kitchen, gave me tea, and I told her everything, and about the pregnancy, and how I overheard the conversation, and about Lion with an axe. I've never been so scared in my life as I was then, and it seems to realize that he has no rights to this house, that it is necessary to go to the police. But I'm afraid, I think, well, they will kick him out of my house, and what then? Stay locked up and keep my nose to the street. Maybe he'll find me somewhere with an axe, and then you won't be able to find the end of it. You'd have to prove it was him." Aunt Clara listened to me, and then she said, "All right, you'll stay with me for a while. Now go to bed, and then we'll see what to do." So I did. In the morning I woke up, and it was so strange. My whole life had turned upside down, and the morning came as if nothing had happened. The sun is shining in the sky, the birds are chirping. I got up and my head was empty. I can't live at Aunt Clara's forever, so should I go to my parents? But then I realized that I can't go to them, I can't scare them with my problems, and I can't stay here forever either. I decided to live like this for a couple of days, and then I'll figure out what to do and how to do it. And so the day passes, and in the evening I was surprised directly. Well, not a day without surprises. I didn't have time to recover from one shock, new miracles. I'm in the kitchen, Aunt Clara roll out the dough, and suddenly I see through the window, as a car to my house, and a girl comes out of it. She has her back to me. I cannot see her face, but the fact that I can see it is enough for a conclusion. She was a tall girl, red-haired, the same girl Liam was dating at the time, and Liam came out of the house all dressed up to meet the lady. Aunt Clara just looked out of the window, sneered, and said nothing. Then the cream knocked down, and I did not know whether to cry or laugh because of Liam's impudence. And so a day passes, too, and the beautiful girl does not leave. Yes, moreover, she comes out of the house in my road to meet Liam from work. They go for a walk, and I see she's wearing a familiar dress, mine. I don't know why she needed it. She didn't look like a beggar. Aunt Clara looked at this red-haired wonder of nature once, twice, and then she winked at me and said, "What a fool your Liam is. You found yourself an old woman with bling." I was stunned, I said. "What are you doing, Aunt Clara? She's young." And Aunt Clara said to me, "You understand that my senior doctor does plastic surgery on all kinds of women who want to look young. So this young woman of yours is a regular client of my surgeon. My daughter came to visit, complained about this woman, showed her pictures. She said, 'Mom, guess how old she is?' I then also decided that maybe 20 years old, and my daughter enlightened me and said, 45, Mom, she already has grandchildren growing up, and she's still 20 years old wants to seem. Her son looks older than her." I couldn't believe my ears. So this fairy has a grown-up son and grandchildren too. Aunt Clara is trying to kill me, she continues, and her ex-husband is also familiar to me, not distant. He is the owner of the local equestrian club. Here I was almost ready to faint. Miracles indeed. It was necessary for my Liam to choose such an interesting specimen as his mistress. And he says to me, "You do this. Go to your parents, and I'll talk to the owner of the club. Let him influence the former and your Romeo." I was hesitant, but then I decided to go, decided that I would not say anything to my parents, just pretend that I came to visit, and that's it. I thought I would live in nature, breathe fresh air. I didn't expect more. But I didn't know my parents well. They bought a dacha so ruined, you can't look at it without tears. I thought I'd come and see my dad fixing something there, and my mom growing cucumbers and tomatoes. Aha, so I come, and they have a paradise there, and the seashore from the window you can see, and their garden all blooming and fragrant. There are armchairs in the garden, a hammock for Grandma, a swing for Mom. Father even arranged a fountain himself and launched fish there, gold ones. Grandma, then in the hammock swinging, reading books, then stands up and goes to feed the fish. But that's not all. My grandmother's neighbor, a cottage dweller, decided to marry her. A noble man, a scientist, studying butterflies. Grandmother, of course, as a decent girl, immediately does not agree, but the eyes that builds and look into the visit invites. I laughed and laughed at them, and I was amused. They are so nice, touching, cute. After all, grown-up people and even not young already, but so much trepidation, as if, well, here is the first love they have. A gentleman used to come to my grandmother's house in the evenings, and he took care of her like that. That today's men would learn from him. Then a basket of apples to bring her, then peaches, then bring honey tasty something, and a bouquet, of course. And not store flowers, half dead ones, but real field flowers. If you take them in your hands, you'll be dizzy. They're so fragrant. Every day he collected flowers for his beloved, and his grandmother set a table in the garden, a teapot, beautiful cups from the service, jam, dried goods, buns, beauty. They sit in the garden late at night, talking about art, about painting. Our elderly young man reads poems to his grandmother, then they walk along the alleys or go to the sea. He holds her hand gently, and the grandmother in a wide-brimmed hat, barefoot along the shore. I looked at their romance like, I don't know, like an interesting movie. You can't tear yourself away. You're wondering what's going to happen next. Well, 3 days passed and I had to go back, and I had the most interesting reasons for it. One morning, a dark gray SUV stopped right outside our fence. The owner of it turned out to be the owner of the equestrian club that the late Uncle James hated so much, but he turned out to be a decent man. So he came up to me, even bowed, introduced himself a little. My name's Brian. He's all dressed in a suit and tie, and I'm just like people at the dacha, dressed in what I can't afford, with no makeup on. Even my hands are smeared with berry juice. I was picking for jam, but it was as if he didn't notice anything, and I was treated as if we had met him at some reception. He says to me, "You, Helen, can go back to your home and live there in peace without fear. Neither your ex-husband nor Betty will ever bother you again. If you'd like, I'm ready to take you back right now." I didn't believe him, so I told him to take me back. So he drove me back to the house, and there's Mommy. Not just no ex, there is also all the minor repairs made, platbins on the windows painted, in the kitchen a new stove stands, and a small room under the nursery is remade, a crib, toys. So I thought, Aunt Clara, what kind of connections do you have? And Brian takes my hand and says quietly, I want to apologize for my ex-wife Betty. We separated a long time ago, and she probably got tired of being alone, so she started looking for a life partner. Don't be angry with her if it's in your power to do so, especially since, as I understand it, you and Liam have already broken up. I nodded, and I waited to see what would happen next. I sensed that he hadn't said everything yet, and I guessed. He thought for a while, and then he said, "Can I invite you to dinner tonight? I think we might have some common topics of conversation. I heard that my father is taking care of your grandmother." Helen shook her head and pulled herself up. "Have I bored you, Thomas?" she asked. "I've had you talking. What happened next?" Thomas asked impatiently. The story had drawn him in, and he was eager to know how it ended. And then it was very simple. The woman smiled. Brian and I were soon married, and I gave birth to 2 first-class boys at the proper time. My grandmother agreed to marry my beau after much beating from her beau, and Aunt Clara became a successful businesswoman. She opened her own pastry shop, and now she has 2 of her daughters working for her. But soon she will have to hire someone else because there are a lot of orders and not enough hands. Aunt Clara is also going to publish a book of her own recipes. How exciting! Sincerely admired the young man. To be honest, While you were telling me everything, I was more worried about Aunt Clara. How long the woman has worked, still pulling the family. Yes, she's a great woman. Fondly, Helen said. It's people like her that keep everything going. And your ex-husband, Liam, do you know what happened to him? Well, Liam's a bit more fun. He married this Betty of his, and it was only after the wedding that he found out about his wife's true age and that she had a grown-up son and even a couple of grandchildren. This, of course, offended him terribly, and there were even rumors that he wanted to divorce her, but Betty turned out to be a cunning lady. She gave Liam a small business, a few flower pavilions, but the gift was very conditional. In other words, she made him the manager, but after the divorce, he could lose that position, and with it a lot of money. Who would like that? Especially if he's used to living large. So Liam lives with his Betty, runs a flower store, and keeps a very careful eye on his appearance so that his wife does not lose interest in him. And of course he succeeds. Wait a minute. Thomas interrupted her. If you are married and have children, why do you live here alone? I'm not here for long. Helen said softly. I'm just planning to open my own atelier here, so I thought I'd live in the city for a while, explore the market, so to speak. I'll be back home soon, and I'll be with my husband and sons again. You know what? Unexpectedly, Thomas suggested. Why don't you not sit alone tonight, but come and visit us tonight? I'll buy a cake. We'll drink tea and talk. Come on. Helen even choked a little from surprise. Thomas, do you really think your mother or anyone else in this house will be happy to see me? They don't know you at all. He said judiciously. That's why they're not happy. But if they knew how kind and simple you are, they'd love you and you'd make a lot of friends. The woman shrugged. It won't work, Thomas. I'm going home tonight. Thomas nodded silently and regretfully. He tried to imagine the town Helen would return to, and the picture was dreamy. He saw apricot trees and the seashore. He smelled the smells of wormwood and pastries from Aunt Clara's pastry shop. I'd like to come and visit you someday, he said. May I? Sure. She was delighted. You'd be very welcome. On the way home, Thomas stopped by the beauty parlor. Now he knew exactly where to spend his summer money. Did you want a haircut, young man? The pretty blonde at the information desk asked. No, he shook his head. Tell me, can I buy a certificate from you? When he got home, he made his mother pull away from cleaning and took her into the kitchen. This is for you, Mom. He smiled and handed his mother a dainty brown and silver envelope. It's a certificate to a beauty parlor. You can get your nails done, your hair colored, and these other things. What are they? Spa treatments. Mother looked at the envelope. How much money did you spend on such nonsense? She muttered. But Thomas could see from the smile that flashed across her lips that her mother was pleased with the gift, but she didn't know how to show it. Even this fleeting smile she hastened to hide behind her usual grumbling, as if she were embarrassed by this unintentional outburst of joy. It's not nothing, Mom, he said affectionately. You are beautiful at me, and all beautiful women must be pampered. Well, so that they do not turn into grandmothers. And only then he noticed that there were tears in his mother's eyes. Thank you, my son. She whispered and hugged Thomas, ruffling the hair at the back of his neck. He thought that perhaps the last time she had hugged him like that was when he was a child. You've grown so big. That's good, isn't it, Mammy? He stroked her shoulder. Now go get some rest. You want to lie in the bath? You want to read a book? I'll take care of the cleaning myself. In the evening, he went out on the balcony just in time to see Helen coming out of the driveway, holding a carabier in her arms. There was not a soul in the courtyard, oddly enough for the warm summertime. The neighbor walked leisurely to her turquoise car and put her dog in the cabin. Before she got behind the wheel, she felt eyes on her, looked up and immediately saw Thomas. She waved at him, and Thomas read the movement of her lips. "Have a nice day. Bye." He raised his hand in farewell. His dad hadn't returned from the garage yet. Thomas peeked into his parents' bedroom and froze on the threshold. His mother was sitting on the bed with a jewelry box in her lap, going through her rings, trying on one or the other and humming softly. As Liam exited another of his controlled pavilions, he noted with amazement that it was beginning to get dark outside. Strange how. You don't get used to the fact that it gets dark late in the summer, and it's already autumn. You could go crazy. Liam looked tiredly at his watch. 9 p.m., so we'd have to stop at another pavilion and then go to the supplier base. Roses should be delivered today, and of course chrysanthemums. They're the most popular item. They're the first to be grabbed, and it's a hell of a delivery. It turns out, then deliver the goods to the points, and before midnight, he will not get today. While he's delivering, while the girls take the goods and report back to him. Roses trim and put to drink, with chrysanthemums more fiddling, cut, remove excess leaves, and then please paint them in all the colors of the rainbow. Customers like multicolored. Florists really are ready from the monotony of wool towel, and they can be understood. Girls are creative. They free self-expression. They want to create unusual floral compositions, and most often they are asked, "Over there those red roses, girl, pieces of 7 and wrap in cellophane." "Don't cry, my good ones." He comforted the florists. "I understand, you understand beauty, you want to create it, but always ask yourself, and who will buy such beauty?" People are conservative creatures. They like the classics, proven virgins. It can't be helped. Creativity is either free or commercial. It's boring to play the same thing day after day. The girls sighed, but deep down they couldn't help but agree with the manager. Yes, boring of course, but what can you do? That's life. In any job, there's a place for routine, and you can't get away from it. However, Liam sometimes managed to amuse the girls. However, he did it in his own way, most often inviting them to cafes and entertaining them with jokes. For this his subordinates loved him and did not refuse to work overtime if he asked them to do so. Moreover, he himself worked late, which was mistaken for diligence. In fact, he just wasn't drawn to go home. Betty was already 50, and although she still managed to hide her age with the efforts of surgeons and cosmetologists, but her mood was the most gloomy, she more and more often held on the mirror reflection, gloomy look. Perhaps if there were a single person who cared about her, he would explain to Betty that it was this sullenness in her once childishly open gaze, those mournfully compressed lips that made her look older. If only she could remember again what it was like to smile with good cheer, she would instantly shed a dozen years. However, the beautician, a kind soul, decided to help her upset client in her own way. "Betty, don't worry, you look great." "Yeah," Betty said. "Great for an old lady." "You're wrong," the girl replied calmly. "Nowadays, 50 isn't old, but if you're so worried, I am." With a sigh, Betty admitted, "It's a shame that no elixir of eternal youth has ever been invented." "Well, eternal or not eternal, there is a secret." "True, it's not a secret at all, but not everyone uses it. You'll fall in love. You know." With doubt in her voice, Betty stretched out. It didn't seem like a good idea to get a young husband now. 5 years ago, she'd been foolish enough to get involved with one, and what had happened? Annoyance and fatigue, let alone a young lover. That beautician's a fool, after all. No, listen to me. Slyly smiled at the girl. First, a man in love himself becomes more beautiful. This is how our hormone works. All that blush on the cheeks, shiny eyes, worth a lot. And then, have you ever wondered why older men love younger ones? Because old goats want young, fresh cabbages, answered Betty gloomily. Right. Why? Simple. The painted finger flew up. That's a kind of energizing, youthful energy, you know. And dying of a massive heart attack during a lovemaking session is also a kind of youthful energy boost. And you don't bring it to such fanaticism. The girl was not confused. Why get so much carried away? Keep within the limits of moderation, and then everything will be all right. Betty sat sullenly in the car for a long time, staring at herself. So I should fall in love? Well, one of her friends, a big fan of young bodies, had said something about a new nightclub opening in town the other day, and she thought it might be a good idea to go there. After all, no one's forcing her to have an affair. You'll see, Betty, you'll like it. Kathy said excitedly, dragging her friend by the hand through the narrow, winding corridors of the nightclub. Why are the aisles so narrow? Betty wrinkled her nose. Was it on purpose so that only skinny people could fit in here? It's called the labyrinth. It's a concept. The concept. Betty grumbled. It's not a concept. It's all contraception. If a couple wants to cuddle, where can they go? You can't fit two people in here. Come on, Betty. My friend laughed. What are we, teenagers or what? To huddle in the corridors? There are other places for that. All right, don't grumble, look. At last the entrance to the common room loomed before them. The light at the end of the tunnel. Betty sighed with relief. The hall was made in the style of a shipwreck. Coral and countless shells dotted the walls. Sea waves splashed on the screens disguised as portholes, and colored schools of fish swam by from time to time. Instead of tables, dark, artificially aged barrels were set up. What are we supposed to do here? Betty asked. Carefully, she lowered herself onto a rickety stool. Rest. Kathy smiled and tapped the barrel. A waiter in a Jack Sparrow costume appeared nearby. What do you want? Beautiful naiads? He smirked. 2 dark rums. Kathy commanded. Double. I don't like rum. Betty hissed, but then a silhouette stepped out of the club's semi-darkness. Dancing? He said, leaning toward the woman. Betty looked into the stranger's face and was instantly drowned in his gaze, deep as the ocean and intoxicating as dark rum. She returned home that evening, cheerful, a little tipsy, and absolutely certain that she was beautiful. Before going to bed, Betty gingerly glanced in the mirror and suddenly saw a delicate pink blush on her cheeks and sparkling eyes. That beautician hadn't been a fool after all. The change in her mood did not escape her husband's notice. Betty was suddenly humming, smiling, even joking. And in general, she was clearly showing signs of a good mood, and she also stopped letting go of her cell phone. And she blushed femininely whenever she got a new message. I don't think they were from Banks. She had a lover. Liam thought and noted that, in fact, he almost didn't care. It was bound to happen sooner or later, and in general, it was not a disaster. Moreover, Liam was clearly holding on to this marriage, not out of tender feelings. His motives were of a different, purely practical nature. He had recently visited his hometown, and he had heard rumors that Helen was happily married to the owner of a horse club and had given birth to twin boys. That's why it was offensive. Lion was not so stupid to resent his ex-wife. His wife was certainly not guilty of anything. Rather, he was angry at the fate, which, as he thought, deceived him. He tried to organize his life so that everything was calm, stable, and in the end, neither of these things. Maybe the point is that you cannot allow your stability and peace of mind depend on the whims of others? Who knows? But that seems to be the point. As soon as I get home, he promised himself, I'll go straight on mine. It's time to look for a new job. In Aunt Clara's pastry shop, there was a joyous buzz today. The birthday of the hostess was always celebrated in a big way and even a kind of glamour. For example, today all the pastries were exclusively French and made according to some ancient recipes. And in the evening there was going to be fireworks in honor of the birthday girl. Helen was pleased to note how much Aunt Clara had grown since she stopped standing at the oven around the clock. Where had that formidable red-faced woman with the wart gone? Aunt Clara was now a pleasantly rounded woman, but no one would call her fat. Not even a memory of the wart remained, and her complexion was fresh, with a slight pinkish blush. Helen quickly found her grandmother and winked conspiratorially at her. The most important event of the holiday was still to come. Today, Aunt Clara was going to announce that after 5 years of widowhood, she was going to remarry. The man she had chosen was a respectable man by the standards of the town. He was the owner of the very cafe where Aunt Clara had worked for many, many years before her first husband lost his job. As it turned out, the owner of this worthy establishment had long ago been in love with the talented cook, but the fact that he was married kept him from openly expressing his feelings. However, a few years ago, his wife left him, and after the divorce was finalized, the owner of the cafe could no longer lurking to begin courting his beloved. And although at first they hid their relationship from everyone, but now they still decided to get married. On this occasion, the lovers planned a wedding trip, which they were going to go to right after today's fireworks. Helen's grandmother, who with her new husband liked to travel, personally made an itinerary of the wedding trip for Aunt Clara. Clara, dear, don't be stubborn. I've found the most romantic cities for you. Look, let's start with Prague. There you'll walk through pastry shops, taste all the impossible deliciousness, and you'll get recipes for your business. Then move to Vienna. Think music, waltzes, fairy tales. You can't find a better place if you want to immerse yourself in an atmosphere of wonder. And then, of course, to Paris, the city of love and debauchery. Don't laugh, darling. You'll need both in marriage. That's enough, Lisa. Aunt Clara Plunkett fears not to hear this outrageous chatter. But Helen knew her grandmother. If she wants to say something, it will be impossible to stop her. Clara, do not show off. I know what I'm saying. And after Paris, Venice. Here you'll find all the romance you want. Canals at night, gondolas, pigeons, and all sorts of stories about Casanova, who, thank God, lived in a different time. After that, you can go home and get to work. Helen looked at the night sky. Very soon fireworks sparks like magic flowers would blossom in it. And most importantly, another happy fate would be formed today. Why just one? 2. Aunt Clara and her lucky fiancé and her children and grandchildren would surely be happy too. They all loved Aunt Clara, their precious, wise mother and grandmother, and of course wished her happiness. Happiness is every man's dream, something for which he overcomes difficulties day after day, for which he works and finds the strength to move on, even when it seems that there is no strength even for one step, and it comes to us in different ways. Aunt Clara deserved her happiness, and it came to her grandmother by itself, and to her, Helen. She thought about it and realized that she didn't know the answer to that question. Is it necessary to know it? The main thing is that all is well with her.
subscribe, and click the bell. Camille had already been living in the orphanage for more than 6 months. The 13-year-old girl kept herself apart all this time. She did not want to come into contact with her peers and classmates. For this, she was nicknamed Bun. Camille was not at all offended by this offensive nickname, as she realized that it was her own fault that now she is called such a girl. When she got to the orphanage, she kept thinking, was it right that she volunteered to live in this institution? After all, Camille told the class teacher about her life, and the teacher sounded the alarm. And all was that Camille had divided her life into 2 parts. Until the age of 11, the girl grew up a happy child. She was cherished by her mom, and dad tried his best they could to buy fashionable things. In general, the parents wanted their daughter to not need anything. And then something happened, and everything went wrong. Initially, the parents between themselves began to fight often, after which the girl's mother often cried. Then he stopped coming home. The father slept over. Camille realized that there was an unhealthy atmosphere in the house, and it would not end well. However, Camille couldn't understand why her parents were fighting, and so she asked her mother, "Why do you and her father fight so often? Do you really want to know?" "I do. I want us to live like we used to, happily and as a family. And I don't want you to cry." "Then go and ask your father why we fight with him." The girl nodded to her mother in response, and when her father came, she turned to him with the same question. The father looked at his daughter carefully, and then called her back to the children's room and put her on a chair, and sat opposite him. The man nervously ran his palm through his hair and then said, "Daughter, you are not so small, and some things should understand. Anyway, I've fallen out of love with your mother, and I want to divorce her. I wanted to talk to you about it earlier, but I didn't dare. Divorcing my mom won't affect our relationship. I just won't live here, but I'll visit you." "Dad, is there another woman in your life?" "That's a serious question. I'll be honest with you. You're right. I have a woman I love and want to live with. You've made your point. I don't want to talk to you anymore," roughly said the girl and rushed to the bathroom, where she gave vent to tears. Now Camille understood her mother, who had been crying a lot lately. After this conversation with her father, a few days passed, and the man soon packed his things and left their family. Camille became withdrawn after Papa's departure. She was incredibly hurt that her father had betrayed her and her mom for another woman. And the girl's mother, after she was abandoned by her husband, just sobbed and cursed her fate. At first, Camille's father visited her, coming once a week to school after lessons. However, Camille did not talk to him and tried to get away from her father as soon as possible. This continued for a month, and the man began to come to school less and less often. Meanwhile, the girl's mother, in order to somehow survive the betrayal, began to impose on strong drinks. Even not perfectly understood that the mother degenerates every day. And when once again the father appeared at school, the girl told him everything and asked him to talk to her mother. The man looked sadly at his daughter and said that he would not do this. And then he added, "Your mom is a grown woman and should understand what she is doing. And I also want to say that now I will rarely visit you. You don't spoil me much with your visits anyway. There's a reason for that. I have a woman I live with who's expecting a baby in the near future, and now I'm gonna have a lot on my mind. You must realize that a baby needs a lot of attention." "That's a great thing to say. You're telling your own daughter. So I don't want to be taken care of. Get out then, and you cannot appear in my life at all." Barely holding back her sobs, the girl said, "I understand that you are offended at the moment. Be patient a little. As soon as the baby is born and grows up, I will visit you more often. You should be happy because you'll have a sister I'll introduce you to. I've told you everything. Go away. And don't show up with anyone. I don't want to meet anyone. I hate you and despise you," the girl said quickly and hurried home. Camille couldn't wait to cry, but she didn't want to do it in front of her father. As soon as Camille got home, She rushed to her room and burst into tears. She wanted her mother to be there to tell her about her conversation with her father. However, when her mother came home drunk, the girl lost all desire to tell her mother anything. A few days passed. Camille came home and was very surprised to find the front door unlocked. Camille remembered exactly that she had closed the door. The girl entered the room and saw that her mother was sitting in the kitchen with tea and a cat on the table. Camille involuntarily wrinkled her nose and said to Mama, "Are you drinking again? For some reason, it wasn't at work that I got fired. Can you imagine, my daughter? Such a valuable employee was kicked out of the company. What are we going to do now? I'll look for a new job. Don't worry, everything will be fine. It's all your father's fault. He left us to our fate." Camille hoped her mother would go to look for a new job the next day, but she didn't. The girl's mother drank heavily for almost a week while she had money. When the finances ran out, she started selling gold jewelry first, and then she started selling things. This went on for some time. Camille tried her best to convince her mother to stop drinking, but she, being drunk, drove away her daughter. Camille realized that soon they would not be able to buy bread. The girl did not know what to do. Camille began to feel hungry all the time, as her mother rarely cooked at home. And lately her mother began to leave in the evening and come back in the morning and again drunk. That's when Camille decided to talk to Emily's class teacher. She told the teacher about her life. The teacher listened attentively to the school drill and then said to the girl, "You can't live like this. I will try to talk to your mom, but I am afraid it will be a waste of time. The only thing I can offer you is to live in an orphanage, where you will be properly taken care of. Maybe the termination of parental rights will make your mom reconsider her views on life, and she will give up her addiction. And don't get me wrong that after your story I will have to contact the guardianship authorities anyway, because I have to respond to the fact that my student does not finish her meals and often stays home alone at night." The very next day, Emily tried to talk to Camille's mother, but the conversation did not work, as the landlady was in an inadequate state. The teacher made another attempt 2 days later, but the situation was repeated. And then the teacher detained the girl after lessons and told her it was useless to talk to your mom. "I ask you not to take offense at me, but I'm appealing to the guardianship authorities. I just don't have a way out. I'm not offended. I've been thinking about your words for a long time, and it seems to me that I would be much better off in an orphanage now. You see, I'm just afraid that I'll go down a crooked path and start stealing from stores so that I won't feel hungry." Good for you for thinking that way. Don't despair. Maybe when you get to the orphanage, your mom will realize that she might lose her own daughter. And soon Camille showed up at the orphanage. Now she was sitting there thinking about her mother and whether it was right for her to want to live in this institution. Camille was distracted from her thoughts by a woman's voice that said, "Sitting alone again as your peers rampage outside." The girl turned around and looked at the woman with a smile. It was Evelyn, the cleaning lady. Camille had become friends with her. A month after coming here, all the children at the orphanage thought Evelyn was a woman. Camille had a different opinion of the janitor. She liked it when the janitor affectionately called her by her first name and asked her how her day was going. Evelyn walked over to the girl and sat down next to her. The older woman already knew Camille's story. For what reasons the child had ended up in the orphanage, the cleaning lady herself did not understand what made her feel special toward this withdrawn girl. And now, seeing the pensive Camille, she quietly turned to her. What she was dreaming about at the moment. "Honestly, about my mom in my life. Tell me, if it's not a secret. I've been waiting a long time for my mom to come and take me away from here. But she never even visited me once. And now I was wondering if I was right to want to live in an orphanage. And now I realize that I was right. I don't need the pits at all. And I have an aversion to her. I feel like pretty soon I'm just gonna hate her." You can't say that about your own mother. You know, I grew up in an orphanage too. My mom gave me up when I was a baby. And at first, I had the same thoughts as you. But as I'd grown up, I've changed my mind drastically. Tell me why. Interested? Camille asked. I'll try to explain it to you with my own example. As soon as I left the orphanage, I entered medical school. When I graduated, I met a young man named Roman. This guy started courting me, and soon we both realized that we loved each other. Soon we had a wedding with him. And then we had our firstborn son, who was named Constantine. And now I come to the most important part. Why did I stop hating my mother? It's because with my husband I lived in peace and harmony. We had a wonderful son. You see, I've been a happy woman all these years. And now you just imagine that if my mother had not given birth to me, I would not have experienced any of this, because I would not be in this world. And that's why I am grateful to my mother for giving me life. And my mother left me in the hospital, but I do not blame her, because it is quite possible that she had good reasons for it. But you know my story, don't you? My mom's only good reason was to drink hard liquor. Your mom slipped up. She's a weak person. Not everyone can be a strong person. Don't just hate her. Believe that you'll grow up. You'll have a happy life. And you will thank your mom more than once for living in this world. Smiling, said the old woman. I don't know. Maybe you are right about that. And tell me, why do you work as a cleaner if you have a nursing education? That's a separate story. At one time I worked as a nurse in a children's clinic. When the years passed, I retired, but continued to work. But soon the management told me that it was necessary to give way to young staff. I had to quit. I did not regret it, as I had a loving husband with me. And my son at that time got married and left for another city. And after I was retired and sitting at home, my husband passed away a year later. And why did you go back to work after that? I don't understand. Sitting alone in four walls is not a particularly pleasant occupation. You're so young, you wouldn't realize it. I just started to feel lonely. And then my son took out a mortgage to buy an apartment. He needed help with the money. So I decided that I'd rather work than just stay at home beating around the bush. And now I've been working here for 4 years, and I've never regretted it. Why don't the children from the orphanage treat you well? I think that this is a question you should ask your peers, not me, Evelyn said with a smile. And then she added, and to find out the answers of boys and girls, you need to talk to them, not stay away from them. Years of life went by. Everything was also kept aloof from peers. Both the boys and the orphanage staff were used to it by now, except that Evelyn was dissatisfied with the fact that Camille was not a sociable child and often talked to the girl about it. And the girl, in turn, in response, only kept silent. Time flew by, and now Camille has already turned 18 years old. It was time for the girl to start living on her own. And the day before Camille had to leave the orphanage, she was approached by a cleaning lady who said, "You're starting a new epoch in your life. You must be careful, because living on your own, you can make a lot of mistakes. I know that the state gave you a one-room apartment somewhere in the periphery, but that's okay. The main thing is that you have your own corner. The only place you've been allocated is there. There's no furniture. I already thought of that. I'll buy you a kitchen table with 4 stools. It'll be a housewarming gift. A bed and a dresser. I'll give them from my son's room. He doesn't need this furniture, but it'll be good for you. I'll give you some of the kitchen utensils. Of course, you've got to give me something to eat. When I decide to visit you, if you don't mind, I'll always be glad to have you here. You've been so supportive while I've been here. I'll be eternally grateful. Oh, don't give me that big talk. And what kind of gratitude is there to be thankful for? Why don't you tell me what you're gonna do? How are you gonna get out of here? I want to be an announcer, and I'm gonna try to get into college. And of course, I'll look for part-time work in the evenings to make a living. And if you don't get in, believe me, it happens a lot. I'll get a job, and in a year I'll try again. And soon Camille moved into a studio apartment. She quickly got settled in and immediately got to know her neighbor. It was a middle-aged woman whose name was Wendy. Soon Camille tried to enter the institute, but disappointment awaited her. The girl missed a few points. After she found out that she was unlucky with the enrollment, she came home in a bad mood. She wanted to cry with grief. Camille only sat down on the bed as she received a call on her cell phone from Evelyn, who asked how things were going. The girl tried not to cry and mouthed, "I didn't get in. And I had so much faith in my abilities." That says what? That you shouldn't be overconfident. Just write that you're going to make your beautiful face raw and put it aside for the moment. Otherwise, I'll scold you like a little girl who went to the wrong potty. The old woman said sternly, "Do you know how to cheer up?" Laughing, the girl said, "That's great. What are your plans now?" "Well, I'm going to look for a job. I need finances to live on." A few days later, the girl got a job in a flower pavilion. The manager at first worked together with Camille, helping her to learn the art of how to beautifully design a bouquet. And after a couple of weeks, the director of the pavilion, Jenna, approved the girl's actions and said that now she could work independently. Camille was happy because she was praised by the director. And so the first day came when Camille went out to work at the pavilion. One girl was very worried, but the first shift went out without any misunderstandings. And on the second day, Camille went to work without worrying that she would not be able to fulfill her duties. The first month flew by as Camille worked in the flower pavilion. The girl enjoyed going to work. One day, a young man came to see her and immediately complimented Camille on her good looks. Camille often heard such words from representatives of the stronger sex and calmly treated them. But this young man said the compliment in a special way, and the girl looked at him with interest. Meanwhile, the guy said, "Can I buy a bouquet of flowers that will reflect your beauty?" Camille, hearing this, laughed and handed the visitor a bouquet of decorative daisies. The young man, seeing the flowers, also laughed and said, "You obviously underestimate yourself. And to be honest, I need the bouquet to give to my friend's girlfriend. It's her birthday today." Camille looked around at the ready bouquets and then chose gladioli. She handed the flowers to the young man and said that such a bouquet should be to the girl's taste. The guy took the mustache and paid and then asked permission to see Camille off in the evening. Camille was not ready for this and therefore refused. Soon the visitor left. The girl had worked her shift and was getting ready to close the pavilion when she saw again the guy who had complimented her today. She looked questioningly at the young man and asked him if he needed another bouquet. "No flowers today. I just want to see you off. But I already refused your request." "All right. Then sell me a bouquet of white roses." Camille complied with the visitor's request, and he took the flowers and put them on the counter, saying that the roses were bought for her. And after that, the guy left the pavilion. The girl was surprised by the stranger's behavior, and at that moment thought that the young man was strange. After this incident, a couple of days passed, and Camille already closed the pavilion and was going to go home. Suddenly, she was called by a lover of daisies. "Would you give me a couple of minutes?" Camille looked at the stranger and recognized him as the man who had recently given her roses. The young man stood near the foreign car and elbowed her. The girl asked what the guy wanted, and the one after her words came up to her and answered that he could not wait to get acquainted with the beauty. Camille did not know how to act in this situation and therefore said, "Let's not do this, and I disgust you." The young man said in surprise, "I didn't say that. I'm just not used to it. Getting acquainted like that. You're putting a price on yourself," sarcastically said the stranger. And then he added, "How long do you have to be groomed to tell me your name?" "All right, you're on. My name is Camille. Now we're talking. And my name is Stephen. Let's get you a ride in the car." "If you want a ride, I'm not getting in the car on foot." Stephen nodded and followed the girl. The young man told different anecdotes about Camille laughed. The girl noted to herself that the new acquaintance was an excellent conversationalist and easy to communicate with, and soon the couple approached Camille's house. Camille thanked the guy for seeing her off, but Stephen stopped her and asked for permission to take a leisurely walk with her again tomorrow. The girl, after some thought, agreed. When she got home, Camille involuntarily thought about the man. It suddenly seemed to her that perhaps this man was her soulmate. And then she pushed these thoughts away from her, realizing that she did not know Stephen at all to allow such thoughts. All the following week, the young man met the girl from work almost every day. From him, she learned that he was 24 years old and studying at the institute. The guy also said that he lived on his own in a 2-room apartment. Stephen said that his father is engaged in business and his mother is a housewife. When Camille heard all this, she said with a smile, "You're just like a major." "That's right. I think I am, too, and it doesn't offend me. Why did I tell you all about me? You haven't told me anything about your own person. I'm also interested to know who your parents are, why you work in a flower pavilion and not study." Camille looked at the guy and said that she was a pupil of an orphanage. She did not tell him the reason why she had gotten there. She was uncomfortable to admit that her mom consumed strong drinks. Stephen, when he heard that Camille was from the orphanage, looked at her in a strange way. This look was noticed by the girl, and she asked what was wrong. The guy at the same moment smiled welcomingly and said that everything was fine, and then invited the interlocutor to come to visit him. Camille refused. It seemed to her that it was too early to be alone with Stephen. The young man, when he heard that Camille did not want to visit, said reproachfully, "And I thought we trusted each other, but it turned out to be completely different. I get the feeling you think I'm a monster. You're wrong. You're a nice guy, but I'd rather get some fresh air than sit in an apartment. But it's better to get some fresh air than to sit in an apartment. You and I have plenty of time. Take me up on my offer. By the way, I have a large soap collection. I know my hobby sounds weird, but I collect soap. Interesting." With a smile said a girl and thought, "And why not really come to visit? Well, at least for an hour." The young man, seeing the doubts of the interlocutor, immediately said, "I'll get you home safe and sound, and you will choose the soap you like. You can even have several and take it from me as president." The girl looked at Stephen and agreed. The couple got into the car and the car started. Camille was riding in a foreign car for the first time. She was inspecting the interior. The young man was discreetly observing it. When the girl turned her attention to the road, the guy asked if she liked the car. Camille enthusiastically concluded that the car was wonderful. She added that it must be very expensive. Stephen voiced the cost, and the interlocutor, nodded. The driver, seeing her reaction, laughed. Soon the couple was already in Stephen's apartment. The girl immediately assessed the atmosphere and softly mumbled that everything here is arranged with taste. The young man smiled and replied that it was the merit of his mother. And then the owner of the apartment offered the guests to drink a glass of sparkling wine. But Camille flatly refused. Then Stephen opened the bar and took out a bottle of liquor from there. He dug it out and splashed the liquid into the shot glasses with the words, "I bought it when I suggested you buy it from Aristov. This drink is not quoted in the orphanage. You must be used to Belenka." The girl from these words of the guy shuddered as from a blow, and sharply said that she does not use strong drinks at all, and then said that if he once again allowed himself to talk to her in this way, then their communication on this note stops. The guy smiled in response and asked his guest to relax, promising that he would not allow himself to do that again. And then Stephen poured himself a strong drink and emptied the glass. The girl, seeing this, involuntarily wrinkled her nose. Then she asked to see the soap collection. The owner of the apartment cordially agreed to fulfill Camille's request and invited her into the bathroom, where the original shelf on the entire wall was pierced, on which were arranged pieces of soap. The girl began to look at the collection with curiosity. Meanwhile, the young man had left the bathroom and had another 100 grams of hard liquor before returning to his visit. Stephen watched as Camille stood on tiptoe and took out first one bar of soap, which she brought to her nose and inhaled the aroma, and then the next. The man felt at that moment a desire to possess this girl right now at this moment enveloped him, and he wrapped his arms around Camille and his hands and turned her to face him, and then starts to tear off the girl's blouse. Camille screamed out loudly for him to leave her alone. However, the guy picked up the guest in his arms and carried her to the couch. Camille was already well aware of what the owner of the apartment was going to do. And then she screamed, "Stop, please. I don't want it to happen like this. After all, I haven't been intimate with a man once before. Not to build for myself, not to cross the road from the orphanage. And they've been doing it there since they were 12. Just be a decent girl now, and we'll give each other pleasure." Camille tried to push the young man away, but the forces were unequal, and after a while Stephen lay on his back and breathed often. And the girl, tucking her legs under her belly, barely audible, was crying. The owner of the apartment, literally after a few minutes from breathing, said, "And you did not deceive me. It turned out, in fact, pious diva, but you pass. You liked it too, didn't you? But tell me the truth, I will now rest, and we can continue." After these words, the girl jumped to her feet and ran to the kitchen, where she grabbed a knife. As soon as Stephen began to approach her, she screamed exhaustedly that she would take her own life if he came near her. The landlord snorted and calmly replied, "I don't need to touch you. I've had mine. Now you can go to all four sides. By the way, you can choose a few bars of soap from the collection. That's your pleasure fee. If you want to meet me, you'll find my address here. Oh, and one more thing. Don't go to the police because my father has connections there. You're only hurting yourself by doing this." The girl looked at the guy with hatred and quickly got dressed, then ran out of the apartment. Camille knew that it was a long way for her to get home, and it would be better to take transportation. But she felt like people knew what had just happened and were looking at her with judgment. So Camille decided that she would get home on her own. Soon the girl was already in the apartment, where she immediately rushed into the bathroom. She wanted to wash herself off with the touch of Stephen's hands. Camille rubbed her body with exasperation, silent. Then Camille sank to the bottom of the tub and sobbed bitterly. The next day, Camille asked the director of the flower pavilion for a day off. The girl told the supervisor that she felt disgusting. The supervisor advised her to call a doctor and said she would work by herself for a few days, while Camille is not feeling well. The girl has been manifesting at home for several days. She did not answer her neighbor's calls, and also the cleaner of the orphanage. Camille just wanted to be at home for a while and hoped that she would succeed. However, Evelyn thought quite differently, who was concerned that the ward was not answering her calls, and the elderly woman initially went to the girl's workplace, and after finding out why Camille was absent from the pavilion, she had already gone to her home. The elderly woman rang the doorbell for a long time, and then, realizing she wouldn't get that one opened, said loudly, "I know you're home. If you don't open the door, I'll break it down. And you know very well that I will." Camille, knowing the temper of the cleaning lady, I realized that Evelyn would do as the girl said, opened the door and saw the worried face, the elderly woman. Camille smiled tiredly and invited the guest to pass. Evelyn looked at the wards and sternly asked what had happened. Camille did not want to tell the cleaning lady anything, and so she lied to her that she had quarreled with a young man. The guests looked at the girl with amazement and muttered, "That's the guy you're killing for. The one you just met. I don't understand you. Did you fall in love so quickly? Let's go to the kitchen and have a cup of tea, and you can tell me all about it." Camille realized that Evelyn would have to lie, so she quickly made up stories. She told the elderly woman that she had quarreled with the young man because he had forbidden her to work. The guest, hearing the explanation, only laughed and remained silent. "That's a silly reason for a quarrel. You should have told your boyfriend that you need something to live on. And if he's going to support you, let him do it. I'm not gonna tell him anything. I'm just gonna leave it at that. Maybe I could have a mother-son talk with him. No way. Better tell me how things are going at the orphanage." The landlady spoke, trying to distract Evelyn from the dangerous topic. Time moved slowly. Camille went to work and then went straight home. Stephen did not appear in her life. What was the girl glad of? She wanted to cut this man out of her life completely and never think of him. So Camille got up in the morning as usual. She had to go to work. As Camille felt sick, she rushed to the restroom, where she immediately threw up. The girl was puzzled as to what had happened to her, but immediately she tried to put all thoughts about her health aside as she had to get ready for work. Camille hoped that the nausea would go away during the day, but it did not. The young woman came home irritated after a day of work. She was depressed about her own physical condition and did not even eat dinner that day. She went to bed early. The next day, the same thing happened again. The girl felt nauseous all the time. After work, she went to the store to buy milk, which she loved very much and allowed herself to buy on rare occasions. Camille went to the counter and wanted to take a bottle. She realized that if she took even a sip of milk, she would immediately vomit. Camille did not buy anything and went home. When she got home, the girl sat down on the bed. The doorbell rang. Camille opened it and saw a neighbor who was holding fried pies on a plate. The woman unceremoniously entered the apartment and spoke. "I want to treat you to some baked goods. I happened to buy fuel milk today." "Oh, don't even remind me of milk. It makes me sick at one word," said the girl, looking at her saliva. "I don't understand you. You've always loved milk, and now you're sick of it. I've been sick of it since yesterday. I thought it would go away today, but it didn't. How's your stool?" "It's fine. I'm walking. It's not poisoning. You know, sweetheart, all your symptoms indicate that you're pregnant. I have a pretty good idea who the father of this baby is. I've seen your young man out the window a few times with you, only now he's gone missing. If I were you, I'd go to the drugstore and get a test. I'm not a gynecologist, but trust me, you're definitely in the right place. Don't be silly. I won't drink tea because I'm tired at work. I'm sleepy." With a slightly noticeable irritation, muttered the landlady of the apartment, who at this minute wanted Wendy to go to her room. The neighbor, hearing that she was being beaten about missing, resentfully pressed her lips together and quickly left. As soon as the woman left the apartment, Camille began to pack quickly. She only wanted to buy a pregnancy test after Wendy's words. The girl was able to allow the thought that she could have gotten pregnant by the rascal. Camille bought the test and persevered with the appropriate procedure. The girl was very worried. She absolutely did not want to give birth to a child from Stephen, who had done such a thing to her. When the test showed positive results, Camille squatted down and cried desperately. The young woman did not know what to do in this situation. The first thing that came to mind was to talk to Evelyn and tell her everything honestly. Camille received a call from the cleaning lady and asked her to come to visit her tomorrow. The elderly woman readily agreed and asked what to take for tea. Camille replied that there was no need to bring any guests since she had Krieger. Evelyn wanted to ask her mentee something else, but she said that the whole conversation would take place tomorrow. The next day in the evening, the old woman was already sitting at Camille's house. The landlady, with her head down, told how she had visited Stephen and how it had all ended. Evelyn listened attentively to Camille and asked what she was going to do. Camille tearfully said she wanted to terminate the pregnancy. When the guest heard this, she said softly, "And you are sure of your decision? Very often it happens that after such procedures, women can no longer have children. But we have modern medicine, and I have nothing to fear. Just understand, if I give birth to this child, this baby will remind me all the time what he did. I am afraid that I hate this child. I'm also afraid that the child will inherit the father's genes and be just as much of a rascal in life. Wait, this is where it all comes together. Is that too much to be afraid of? Let me get this straight. What about medicine? You know, there's a saying that goes, there's a silver lining. That's the case with you. Let's move on. That the child will resemble his father, but it won't. As soon as you put the baby to the breast to feed, you'll realize that this baby is yours alone. Now, about genes. What do genes have to do with it? You're gonna raise the baby. What you put into it is what you'll reap. I'm not in any way trying to talk you into keeping the baby. I'm just trying to make you realize that you have to make these decisions consciously, not in haste, when emotions are running high. And that's what you're going through right now. My advice to you is to go to a gynecologist and make sure that you are pregnant, since tests can also give wrong results. If the pregnancy is confirmed, then check with the doctor until what term you can think about whether to keep the baby or not. And only after that, make a decision. After a while, Camille had already been to the women's clinic and knew for sure that she was in an interesting position. The young woman had contradictory feelings. On the one hand, she was pleased that life had begun inside her. But on the other hand, when she thought of Stephen, she felt disgusted with the child. Camille procrastinated for a long time and then made the choice that she would give birth to this baby, and it would be a joy in her life. The young woman was informed about her decision by the orphanage worker, who was happy to hear the news and immediately said that she would give the stroller as a gift as a grandmother. After Evelyn learned that the ward would give birth, she came to visit her and from the threshold said that it was necessary to have a serious talk. Camille was surprised at this and invited the elderly woman into the guest room and sat down and looked at the landlady carefully and only then spoke. Having a baby is good, but you need to think about the financial side. You have to persuade your manager to make you an official salesperson. That way you'll get an allowance. And if she refuses, find a way to get the director of the flower pavilion to agree. You'll need that money to live on in the future. You know, I don't just give advice. After all, I've lived most of my life already. And please don't put off this conversation with your supervisor until later. Camille, after this conversation with Evelyn, turned to her supervisor. Jenna promised to think about it. And now a month has passed since that conversation, and the supervisor has remained silent on the subject. Camille again talked to her supervisor about official employment. Jenna promised that she would do it in a week. However, a month passed, but the supervisor did not lift a finger on the matter. And when Camille tried to talk about it again, the supervisor pointed to the young woman's slightly bulging belly and said, "Do you want me to pay you benefits? But that's not going to happen. Why would I transfer my money to nowhere?" "You don't say." "What do you mean, nowhere? This money will be a great help to us. As soon as the baby's old enough, I'm going back to work for you." My answer to you: no, you work one more week and then I'm firing you. You're a good girl. Yeah, she's helping the unmarried. And I'm not going to. Camille was stunned by Jenna's answer. Camille seemed to have developed a good relationship with her supervisor. After all, when the supervisor asked to stay longer after the workday, the girl willingly complied with her request. And now that Camille had been refused, she was extremely offended that she had received such a reward for all her hard work. Camille recounted this conversation with the director of Evelyn's flower pavilion. The elderly woman was outraged after hearing the news. She wanted to go and talk to Jenna herself and tell the manager that she was acting illegally. That's one thing. And secondly, decent people don't do that. Camille talked the old lady out of it. She said, "You won't get anything out of it. I worked unofficially, and that says it all. It's my own fault for not having thought of this earlier, to formalize an employment contract." Soon Camille was out of work. The young woman was handed as she realized that the salary she received after she stopped working in the flower pavilion would not be enough for a long time. So Camille began to pound various structures in order to find some kind of work before the payment of maternity benefits. However, she was denied everywhere, and seeing that she is in an interesting position, and still the young woman found a job. True, it paid a pittance. The girl had to hand out advertising booklets on the street. Camille realized that she earns a pittance here, but at the moment she was happy about it. Time flew by, and now the young woman gave birth to a baby girl, whom she named Vanessa. Camille fondly felt the little bundle and mentally thanked the cleaning lady, who had made her realize that the decision should be made without any violent thoughts. Camille realized that it was only thanks to that conversation with the technician that she had kept the baby under her heart. And now that baby was born from the maternity ward. Camille was greeted by Evelyn. The elderly woman accepted the small package from the nurse's hands and suddenly cried. Camille was puzzled why the cleaning lady was crying now and asked her about it. "You should be happy. Are you crying? Why? I'm glad you made the right decision at the right time. And now I answer to my granddaughter." Time has slowly moved on. Camille enjoyed learning the role of a mother. She was busy practicing with her daughter. All the motherly duties she lovingly performed. And even when Vanessa switched from day to night, it didn't work for the young woman to have to adjust to a child. It had been a month since Camille had become a mom. And at this point, Camille clearly realized that the allowance was completely inadequate for living. Her daughter needed to buy formula, which cost a lot of money, and she also had to buy shipping, oils, baby soap, and other baby products for the baby. The young woman was at a loss, and it was the first time she had not paid her utility bill. Another 2 months passed. Camille lost weight during this time, as she denied herself food, only to be fed. Camille's daughter helped Evelyn, but only in small amounts. The elderly woman saw perfectly well how difficult it was for her ward, and one day a conversation took place between the cleaning lady and Camille. Camille said to the technician in despair, "I don't know what to do. I was already thinking of putting my daughter in an orphanage for a while and visiting her there. And as soon as she's a little older, I'll take her out of there and get a job in the meantime. That's the stupidest decision I've ever heard. If you do that, you'll lose Vanessa forever. You'd have to give up your parental rights if you did that. Do you even think about what you're saying? I don't know how to make ends meet." With tears in her eyes, said the girl, and immediately added, "Other children at this age have cribs. My daughter still sleeps in the stroller you gave us. The crib is not the most important thing. I'll try to give you a little more money. I don't feel comfortable accepting finances from you anymore. I don't know when I'll be able to pay you back. I'd like to get a job, and then everything will change." After this conversation, about 2 weeks passed, and Evelyn came to visit Camille. The old woman went into the kitchen and put a box with a long cake on the table. The landlady looked at her guest with bewilderment and asked what kind of celebration. The cleaning lady smiled and said, "Celebrating my dismissal from work. I've become too old to carry big buckets of water, and now I've decided to retire. And the salary at the orphanage is tiny. I'll be with Vanessa from now on. And you're trying to get a job, but you still need to help your son. I haven't forgotten about that. They'll cut back on their rations. There's no other option. Although there is one other option, which is to go to the father, establish paternity with DNA, and then demand child support from him. Don't ever say that to me again. I'll never go to what? This is my child and mine alone. Consider me." Vanessa started from the wind in the field with a challenge, exclaimed Camille. "You see, so there's only one way out. I sit busy and you look for a job. Did I like the way you stood up to Stephen just now?" Evelyn said with a smile. A few days later, Camille got a job as a salesman in a small market not far from home. The young woman was attracted by the fact that the market had a convenient schedule. It was necessary to come to 7 o'clock, and the Labor Day ended at 14:00. The only thing that marred the girl was not particularly high wages, about which she told Evelyn. The old woman said in response that she found something to be upset about. "Your salary is higher than the one I received when I worked in the orphanage." Soon Camille went to work. She was a little uneasy, as she had never worked with weighty goods. However, her employer explained everything in detail and spent the day with her, helping the girl to cope with selling vegetables. And so already Camille worked for 3 days at the market. Here the girl met her neighbor Molly, who was selling fruit. The women talked to each other, and Molly in one of the conversations unexpectedly dropped that Camille had hired an employer for nothing. The woman looked at her interlocutor with surprise and asked her why she had said that. Molly embarrassed Cashin, and then, waving her hand, spoke out, "And what will I hide it from you? All the same, after all, the truth will tell you others." The thing is that your boss, Nancy, very often changed salespeople. Regular customers will tell you that soon enough. I've had a couple of people tell me that there's a new salesperson again, but I didn't pay much attention to it. And why Nancy and the salesman do not linger. The answer is simple, constant shortages. At Sveta's, the longest that the sellers have worked is 4 months, as far as I remember. A few days after this conversation, there was an unpleasant incident at Camille's workplace. Toward the end of the workday, as usual, Nancy and her husband arrived to pick up the proceeds. Camille counted out the money and held it out to the supervisor, who looked at the financials and grudgingly said that the amount was too small. Camille narrowed her eyes and replied that they had overpriced vegetables, and customers often left for competitors. Nancy, hearing this, said that one should be able to interest the person who approached the goods and not rely on high prices. The businesswoman then approached the vegetables and inspected them meticulously. Nancy then saw some affected tomatoes. She took out the tomatoes and placed them in front of Camille. The woman looked at the woman perplexed and said quietly, "Vegetables have a way of spoiling. It's not my fault. I agree with you on that. But spoiled goods should be weighed and recorded and kept separately. But I did. I just didn't have time to put these tomatoes aside," Camille said, and quickly took out a notebook in which she wrote down the spoiled vegetables. The girl held out her notes to Nancy. The businesswoman took a quick look at the notebook and spoke in a stern voice. "All this will be deducted from your wages. And now these tomatoes can be taken to your home. How's that? And yesterday's game was cucumbers. I gave them to you. Are you going to take them out of my paycheck too? But that's not fair." Almost crying, said the girl. "It's not for me to teach you how to work with goods. You did not rush to me, so you should do your job. If you see that you have a spoilage of this or that kind of vegetables, you try to block it. From this day on, you are responsible for all spoiled tomatoes, cucumbers, and so on." Camille was walking home after a day's work in high spirits. As soon as she entered the apartment, Evelyn approached her and raised her index finger to her lips. That meant it was worth talking in a whisper. It meant it was worth talking in whispers since Vanessa was asleep. The old woman, seeing Camille in a bad mood, immediately realized that the girl was in trouble. She asked Camille to go to the kitchen and asked her what was wrong. The girl took out the tomatoes and put them on the table. And only then she told what had happened. And at the end of her narrative, she added, "I don't know how to weigh people. I am ashamed to do it. I will not hide that I add a few grams somewhere. I was advised to do so by a neighbor who sells nearby. But how can I answer the customers if I have a kilogram of tomatoes, for example, will rot? Do not be upset. From work a month and see what salary you get. If it will be pennies, then there's nothing to stay there." A month went by and an audit was done. Nancy informed Camille that there was a shortage and told her the amount. The girl was already ready for it, so without too many questions, the businesswoman offered to deduct the shortage. Then she informed Nancy that she was no longer working for her. The next day, Camille again went to look for work at the market where she worked. The girl did not want to go, and that was one reason not to go out with Nancy. Camille decided that it was possible to find a position as a vendor at the bazaar, which was a few stops away from her home. The girl remembered Evelyn's advice, and so she wanted to get a job selling piece goods. Camille was lucky right away. She saw several advertisements at the entrance to the market for sellers. Camille approached one employer, and he said he would be happy to hire her. The girl immediately asked about the salary, and the man voiced the amount. Camille has been drinking since morning, looked at the entrepreneur, and said that this is paltry money. The employer smirked and said, "I do not know you, my dear, so there will be a trial period. If we work out, well, in the sense that there will be no shortages, then in a couple of months your salary will increase. That's what all the entrepreneurs do around here. Maybe you should check it out." The girl sighed dejectedly and agreed to the man's proposal. And then she went on to look at the other sellers' merchandise. It was only when Camille walked a little farther away that she was stopped by a woman who was selling toys. The stranger spoke up. I heard that you are tuning up for work. Well, I can tell you that all these entrepreneurs promise to raise wages after a while, but not all of them keep their promises. Are you saying that the man I hired will cheat me too? I don't know anything about him. I'm talking about me. I've been working here for about 4 months now, and I've had no complaints. And I was promised a raise. They're still giving me a raise. I'm out of options, so I'm going to have to take my chances and work for this man. Camille left the market after talking to the saleswoman and went to the bus stop. The girl felt disappointed that things were going wrong for her. She thought she would find a job where she would get a great salary, but everything turned out to be exactly the opposite. Soon the bus pulled up. The girl entered the transportation and sat down on the empty seats, but 2 girls were already sitting against her and talking animatedly. Camille, to distract herself from bitter thoughts, involuntarily began to listen to the dialogue of strangers. Initially, Camille realized that they were 2 former classmates who had met after a while and were discussing their peers who were in the same class. Soon Camille got tired of listening to the girls and wanted to turn her attention to the view from the window. So she heard what the brunette said, addressing her interlocutor. Do you remember Miranda from our class, who always wore her older sister's clothes? We used to make fun of her for it all the time. You wouldn't believe it. I saw her the other day at the coffee shop where I was sitting with my son. I was stunned at how Katya looked originally. I didn't even believe it was her. I called out her name. Miranda smiled at me and moved to the table next to me. I stared at her with my mouth hanging open. It was a luxurious girl, which is immediately obvious that she visits expensive beauty salons. About the way she is dressed, I'm not talking at all. She has fashionable pants, a suit of such a coastal color, and in that to it in sandals. Practically on all fingers descendants and a gold ring. If in general to say, then in front of me was a stylish girl who knows her own price. Katya, whom we knew as the poorest in school. Probably married well, replied the person I was talking to. But you are wrong. She is not married, and is not even in a hurry. Then how did she succeed in life? The second girl asked, perplexed. This was curious for me too, and I asked her about it. Miranda answered that she earns money with her body. She said it so simply that I was very sweet of her answer. I asked her if doing it for money is disgusting. The answer was simple. Miranda said that now she can afford what she wants to do. And as for whether it is disgusting or not, she said that she treats it like a job. I was taken aback by this news. I don't even have the words to describe it. And further, Camille did not hear what the brunette said in response, because after the lecturer announced Camille's stop, the girl got off the bus and went home, thinking about the conversation between the 2 former classmates. Just then, the young woman saw a bench and sat down on it. She thought about this Miranda who earns money this way. Camille sat for a while as a call came from her neighbor. Wendy reported that Evelyn had become ill and had been rushed to the hospital. Then the neighbor added that Vanessa was at her place. Camille rose abruptly from the bench and ran home. The young woman immediately went to her, where she learned that Evelyn suddenly felt pain in her chest and called Wendy. She in turn called an ambulance, and the older woman was hospitalized. Camille was frightened. She was worried about the pensioner's condition. Camille called the hospital to find out how Evelyn was doing, but I answered that the woman was now in intensive care and all answers would not be available until the next day. Camille slumped down in her chair after the call. She already realized that tomorrow she would not go to any work because Vanessa had no one to leave her with. And also the girl realized that the pensioner would need medicine, which means that she would need finances. All these thoughts made the young woman cry. She was well aware that there was nowhere to go for help at the moment. The next day, Camille put her daughter in the stroller and went to the hospital. Camille mentally asked the Almighty to make Evelyn feel better. The girl was very afraid of losing her dear person. And here it was not that the old woman helped financially, but in another way, that the pensioner supported Camille morally and did not let her be discouraged. Soon Camille was already sitting in the hospital room opposite Evelyn, who had already been brought back from intensive care. The girl stroked the elderly woman's hand and asked her to hold on. The pensioner smiled at the ward and replied, "To me, don't worry, I made it through. But how will you be now?" "Alone, we are slowly leaving. I have an idea. Let's call your son to come here. It would be nice for you to see him. You're going about it the wrong way, sweetheart. I'm not going to die, so let your son come here when he gets a chance. And if you're implying that you're asking him for financial help, forget it. My son is having a hard time too. He's paying a mortgage, and he has 3 kids to feed, clothe, and shoe. All right, calm down. I didn't mean to ask him for help. I just thought it would do you good to see your son and get you back on your feet. The turkey thought I was screwed too," he said sternly. "And the woman." And then she said more softly, "All right, I knew you meant what you said out of the goodness of your heart. You'd better tell me that your job is going great. They said you'd be out in a week. So you have exactly 1 week to rest and get back into action," said Camille Savrasov. Having worked soon, Camille returned home with her daughter after the hospital. The young woman played with Utah for a while and then fed her and put her to bed. Afterward, she sat down on the couch and thought about her deception about Evelyn's job. Camille suddenly realized that she had not just told a lie to the older woman. It had been done intentionally. Camille had made the decision even then that she would go to the track to earn money. The realization that she would be selling her body no longer frightened the girl. Camille realized that she simply had no way out. It would be possible to go to work as a salesman, but the young woman already knew that she lacked the so-called salesmanship. This meant that Camille would have to pay for shortages or damaged goods. You could also work as a dishwasher, but it paid a pittance, and the other girl was not given, as there was no appropriate education. And so Camille decided to go to the highway. After a while, Evelyn was discharged from the hospital. The pensioner was taken away by Camille and her daughter. The girl fondly hugged the old woman and said that she would not allow her to be sick anymore. Evelyn smiled at her ward's words and promised. Evelyn smiled at her mentee's words and promised not to do it at all. A few more days passed after the discharge of the pensioner. Camille informed the elderly woman that she was going to work tomorrow. Evelyn asked the girl what her job was. Camille thought for a while and replied, "How can I put it to you so you understand? Basically, I have to go around the world. Basically, I have to go to businesses and collect signatures. Why collect them? I won't tell you yet, because it's gonna be a rotating assignment every few days. But the upside is that I'll be paid by the number of signatures, which means as soon as I complete the assignment, we'll have the money. That's a weird job. It's the first time I've heard of such a job," the older woman said, perplexed. "There's nothing strange about it. We are not living in the Stone Age after all. There are many specialties now that you have never even heard of. I'm not going to argue with you. You'd better tell me everything after the first day of work." So Camille is getting ready for work. Evelyn is puzzled and asks the mentees why the working day starts so late, and the time was around 15 o'clock. Camille quickly finds an answer and says that at this time, people are better in contact, and therefore the opportunity to collect more signatures increases. And then the girl added that this way she could earn more money. After a while, Camille stood on the highway. She, so that the pensioner did not guess anything, bought a mini skirt and a blouse with a deep neckline in advance. In all these clothes, the girl changed before going out on the highway. And here already Camille stands on the road and waits for the truck. Initially, cars stopped in front of her, and the drivers offered Camille a ride. However, the girl immediately decided that she needed chauffeurs who work as truckers. She herself did not understand why this decision came to her mind, and soon a truck slowed down in front of Camille. A man's head peeked out of the cab. The driver evaluated the girl and offered her a ride. Camille smiled and got into the driver's cab. The man once again looked at her traveling companion and said, You must be new here, because I haven't seen you here before. And you? I see that you are already a regular here, if you know everyone," said the girl, trying to say so that her voice did not shake from excitement. However, the man as if caught her inner state. "And so he asked, you are obviously going to do this case for the first time. Don't worry, I won't hurt you. I know the rates, and I will pay even a little more than what is required." After a while, Camille was already out of the cab. The young woman adjusted her skirt, and at the same moment heard a man shouting to her that she was gorgeous and that he would like to meet her again. The girl reluctantly waved him off and walked slowly down the road. At the moment, Camille felt dirty. She couldn't stand the urge to shower to wash off the stranger's touch. But Camille forced herself to think about the fact that this was just a job that would help her and not live. The young woman came home. Already as before the evening, Evelyn looked anxiously at the ward, but the latter smiled amiably and said that there was the first earnings, and handed the pensioner the money. The old woman looked at the money and frightenedly said, "Wow, a decent amount for one working day. Today was just a lucky day. There was only one task that needed to be done today. So I tried to collect more signatures. I had to visit a lot of different agencies, but it was worth it. I don't like you coming home alone so late. You're a girl who knows what can happen. You better get fewer signatures and come home earlier. You know, there's a popular wisdom that you can't make all the money you want. That goes for you. We'll see. And now we should be happy that we have finances, and we will be able to buy, not a crib, so that the child sleeps not in a stroller. I'm also very tired as I've been walking a lot. So can I take a shower and go to bed?" Evelyn offered the girl to eat first, and then already take hygienic procedures, but Camille refused. The young woman wanted to actually take a shower and just forget about what she had done today of her own free will. As soon as Camille got to the bed and Evelyn, who had stayed with her tonight because Camille had come home late, was lying next to her, she felt ashamed. The landlady turned to the pensioner in a whisper and apologized for the late visit. The guest stroked her ward in response and asked her not to worry about nothing. Only after these words, Evelyn Camille calmly sighed. Immediately, she was struck by an electric shock. She realized that, doing such work, she had not thought about the most important thing, that she could get pregnant. Camille immediately decided that she would buy birth control tomorrow. The next day, Camille didn't go anywhere. What surprised the pensioner? The elderly woman asked why Camille had the day off today. The girl laughed in response and said that she would not have a job every day. Camille could not admit to Evelyn that today she simply did not want to go to the track, as there was still a residue on her soul from the way she had earned the money. It had been 2 days since Camille had given pleasure to the driver of the truck. It was only after that that the young woman decided to go out on the highway again. It was not an easy decision for her, and it was as if felt by Evelyn, who asked the girl where her office with the management was located. Camille realized that if she didn't make a precise schedule of the so-called work, the pensioner would sound the alarm and start to find out everything herself. So Camille decided that from this day forward, she would go out to the track once every 3 days. Camille had already been working in this way for 2 weeks. During that time, the girl bought her daughter a crib. Camille realized that she could not go on like this forever, and she comforted herself with the fact that it was only until her daughter grew up a little. And then the girl planned to give Anya to the kindergarten and herself to enroll in correspondence studies at the institute. And so Camille once again went out on the highway. She was waiting for a truck, and at the same time remembered the movie Pretty Woman. She liked this movie very much. The girl imagined herself in the role of the main character and dreamed that she would one day happen in her life. She wanted to meet a prince on a white horse who will pull her out of the swamp and will love not only her, but also Anya that. However, the young woman understood that this will not happen, as it only happens in movies, where the plot is invented to interest the viewer. And yet the girl still dreamed about it, realizing that it would not happen to her. Reflections, and the girl was interrupted by a stopped car. Camille looked into the car, and from horror, the whole transport belonged to the husband of her neighbor. And this meant that now the man would start asking unnecessary questions about what she was doing on the highway. And in fact, the car door opened, and the neighbor looked out and said in surprise, "Camille, I didn't expect to see you here. What are you doing here?" "My wife told me you got a job." "That's right, Wendy. But it's my day off. And here I am waiting for a young man. Let's just say I have a date. I'll ask you not to tell your spouse about this. She'll be asking me all kinds of questions." "That's right." Laughing, the man said. And then he added, "My Wendy, curious person wants to know everything about everyone. Only that you chose a meeting with your boyfriend in a not very convenient place." "Yeah, I already realized that." As soon as the neighbor left, Camille breathed a sigh of relief. She'd expected a lot more questions from Wendy's husband. And there weren't many. Now the girl was only worried that the neighbor would not tell about their encounter on the road. Camille knew very well that Wendy often met with Evelyn and could tell the elderly woman that Camille was standing on the highway. And if the old woman found out about it, she wouldn't let up until she knew the whole truth. Camille, on the other hand, absolutely did not want Evelyn to know the way she made her money. A few days passed. Camille was once again standing on the highway, waiting for a truck. And then a beautiful black Jeep stopped in front of her. Two big guys jumped out of the cabin, who picked up the girl under the elbows and quickly pushed her into the car. The young woman did not even have time to shout, as she was already in the Jeep. And here an obese man turned to her from the front seat, who looked at her carefully and then asked her how long she had been doing this. Camille was startled and said she did not know what he was talking about. Her phrase made the stranger angry, and he spoke harshly. "You don't make a pie girl of yourself here. This is my territory. And I have already been informed that there is a young lady who works without taxes. And as it turns out, this young lady is you. So let's be honest. Otherwise, my boys are gonna have a different conversation with you." Camille, looking at the stranger, clearly realized that it was not worth lying to this man, because he would keep his word. The girl admitted that she had been out on the track for a little less than a month, and immediately added that she didn't do it every day. Hearing the young woman's retort, the man nodded contentedly. Then he said softly, "My name is Sam. Now I see that you're telling the truth, and you're a good girl, because you figured it out the first time. Now listen to what I have to say. You work on my territory, which means I have to pay tax to the treasury, like any decent citizen. But the treasury for you will not be the state, but my pocket. And in general, on the first of every month, you will bring me a sum of money to my address. If you don't, you realize you'll be dealing with my boys sitting next to you. Now tell me what you got." "I've got you scared," the girl muttered fearfully. "That's great. It's a pleasure doing business with you," said the man, and handed Camille a piece of paper on which was written an address and a sum of money. Camille looked at the entry and the window, and then said, But this is a large sum. It's almost half of what I'll earn in a month, and who has an easy life these days? You see, I'm not an unemployment fund. I want to eat good food too. And if you don't like this amount, go work at the factory as a laborer. I didn't force you to go to the highway, so you decide what's good for you. Anyway, this is a short conversation. Either you pay or you're out of here. And I'm waiting for your decision right now." "Okay, I'll do it." After that, the young woman was allowed out of the car. And as soon as Camille left the car, the Jeep drove off. Camille looked after the car and tears rolled down her cheeks. She realized that from now on, she would have to pay back almost half of the money she had earned. After this conversation, the young woman decided that today she would not work. After a while, the girl was already at home. She entered the apartment and saw the surprised face of the pensioner, who asked why she did not come so early. Camille glumly replied that the day had not gone well and there were no errands to run. Evelyn looked at the girl carefully and said sternly, "Don't tell me fairy tales here. Tell me what really happened. I've known you for years, and I can see that you're worried. Camille was about to tell me the truth about where and how she made her money. But then she looked at Evelyn. She felt ashamed to tell the old woman. The girl collected the pensioner again and wrote tall tales that she had not been paid for her assignment today. Evelyn, inquisitive, looked at the interlocutor and helped. I hope you are not deceiving me. And about the fact that they paid, I understand that it's frustrating. But you can't be too upset about it. Every job has a slip-up. You had one. All right, calm down. Come on, I'll feed you and tell you how we fought the duck today. After Evelyn's words, the girl sighed with relief that the conversation on a dangerous topic was over. And then together with the pensioner went to the kitchen, where she listened to the elderly woman, who enthusiastically told how she spent the day sonnets. The next day, Camille felt ill. She had a fever and a sore throat. Camille realized she had a cold. The young woman wrote about herself as she realized that it was impossible to be sicker now. After all, it was urgent to earn money to pay tribute to the track. Soon, Evelyn arrived at Camille's house and immediately announced that the labor activity would cease for the time being. Camille, as soon as she heard this with a sad smile, said that these were the words she had expected from Evelyn. In response, she said, "Don't think I'm such a predictable madam. I'll call a doctor and persuade the doctor to put you in the hospital. You don't have to do that. You're a doctor, so treat me with us agreed, but only sick. You will follow all my instructions." With a smile, said Evelyn, specifically addressing Daddy's ward. Camille recovered. 7 days later, she wanted to go to work again, but she was prevented from doing so by a pensioner. The elderly woman said that Camille had not yet recovered from her illness and needed to stay at home for a couple more days. There was nothing left for the girl to do, only to agree with Evelyn's decision. 2 days later, Camille was already standing on the highway. She was thinking about how to raise the necessary amount for Wendy. The young woman realized that she was not ready to go to work every day, but she also realized that it was necessary to give the money. And then one solution came to her mind, that one day it was necessary to double the number of clients, and only she thought about it as a truck stopped in front of her. The girl climbed into the cab and closed the door and then turned to the driver. Immediately, with fear, she faintly shuddered. In front of her sat the man who had robbed her of her innocence. The young woman only wanted to get out of the car. As the young man menacingly ordered her not to move from her seat, and in doing so grabbed her arm, Camille expelled and asked Stephen to let her go. The guy grinned and said that she had willingly got into the vehicle, and then added that you were a pious lady offering your services on the highway. And at that time you did not make a road out of yourself. Well, let's see what you have managed to learn during this time. I can't wait to reminisce with an old acquaintance who picked up during this time of experience. They're gonna let me out of the car. And don't even think that I'm going to have fun with you, and you shouldn't shame me, since it's only to your credit that I'm out here on the highway making a living. You're the one who took my virginity against my will, and I got pregnant afterward. I have a young daughter who needs food, diapers, skates, etc., and my allowance isn't very high. And you knew I was an orphanage kid with no one to stand up for me. So you used your power that day. I hate you. Are you telling me you had my baby? That's an unexpected twist. Don't tell me you want to get child support from me now. You make money on the highway. Somebody got you pregnant, Stephen said defiantly. Even though you're the biological father of the child, I can assure you that we don't need your money. You can choke on your finances, and the fact that you have a daughter you can forget forever. And let's stop this stupid conversation. There's only one thing I don't understand right now. I mean, you're such a big shot, and you work as a trucker. That doesn't make sense. Okay, I don't want to waste my time with you. Let me get out of the car. I can't take care of myself. Camille tried to open the door of the truck, but she was pulled to her by Stephen Force and tried to lift her skirt. The girl screamed in desperation and began to fight back. At that moment, a voice came from behind them. It was a man speaking to the driver. Let her go right now. What are you doing? Partner, you know I like to have fun with the girls on the road, Stephen said in a perplexed voice. You'll find another girl on the way, the man replied. Christopher, you're my partner, but in this case I don't understand you, said Stephen, and let the girl go. In the meantime, Camille glanced back and looked at the protector. He was a handsome middle-aged man who looked her straight in the eye. The girl nodded gratefully and started to open the door of the truck, but she was called by her partner Stephen. The young woman looked back and glanced questioningly at the man. At that moment, he took out a purse and took out some bills, which he immediately handed to Camille with the words, "This is enough for you and the little girl for the first time, and try to change your trade. It doesn't suit you. You'd better find another way to make money. Now go home to your daughter, who's sure to miss you." "But I can't take the money." "Just like that," Camille said. "You can. Take it and go. If I see you on the road again, they'll think you're a fallen woman," Christopher said sternly. The young woman took the money and nodded gratefully once more and quickly got out of the car. As soon as the young woman left the cab, the truck started at the same moment. Camille looked at the car and thought about the stranger's words. Camille stood for a while longer and then headed home. The girl thought that there was only one trouble for today. It was the meeting with Stephen, but she was wrong. Camille had just arrived home, so she saw that her neighbor was visiting. Camille said hello to her, but she said nothing and hurried away to her room. The girl looked at her neighbor with a puzzled look. Then she turned to Evelyn. "What's the matter with Wendy? I came in and she just ran off. She didn't even say hello, and I thought we'd had no quarrel with her." The pensioner didn't say a word in response. The old woman asked if she had earned it today. Camille girl with a smile replied that she received a good sum for work, and with these words began to take out her purse to show her finances. Camille took out the money and handed it to Evelyn with words, "Here, take at least part of it. I suggest that tomorrow we go to the market together and buy some goodies. How about it?" The pensioner approached the girl and took the money. The old woman studied the bills for a long time and then asked her mockingly what was Camille's task today. Camille immediately sensed a trick in Evelyn's question. She answered that today she was collecting signatures for the advertisement. The old woman laughed and then, with a sharp movement, threw the money in the face of her ward with the words, "Who did you decide to deceive?" And after this phrase, the pensioner snatched from Camille's hands a bag from which to shake out the clothes. Evelyn picked up the fallen short skirt from the floor, as well as a blouse with a deep neckline. The older woman held out the clothes to the girl and said reproachfully, "This is your uniform. When you collect signatures from truckers, don't give me any more fairy tales. Wendy saw you today, driving down the highway with her husband. A neighbor told me you were wearing those clothes when you got into the truck. She also told me that her husband had seen you on the road before. By the way, he's been getting the same shit from you. That you were on a date. How could you do something like that? Tell me, don't you hate what you're doing? Can you imagine what your daughter will think of you when she finds out? I'm ashamed of what you're doing right now. It's like you stabbed me in the back. I didn't expect you to deceive me like that. You." Evelyn shoved things into Camille's hands. Camille and silently went to the kitchen, where she sat down at the table and not in a coffin and cried softly. Camille came in after her and tried to hug the older woman, but the latter pushed her away. The girl realized that she had caused her dear one unbearable heartache. She wanted to say something in her defense, but there were no words. Camille knelt down in front of Evelyn and spoke loudly. "It's my fault, and I admit it. I know I have offended you very much, and I have nothing to say for myself. Believe me, I did not go to the track for my own pleasure, but only to survive. Just don't pretend you're poor. There are plenty of single moms who find a way to make ends meet, and they don't go selling their bodies. Like you did, scold me with tears in my eyes directly killed Camille. I won't tell you anything else. I'll just leave now and try to forget that I ever met you. Small pennies. I'll pay you back, but we won't see each other anymore. And you can continue to go out for signatures on the highway. said the old woman and got up from the table. She wanted to take a step, but could not, for her knees were encompassed by Camille, who cried, sobbing profusely. For a few minutes the girl held Evelyn by the legs and then raised her face to the pensioner, and through her sobs said, "You may scold me with hurtful words. I bear it all. Just don't cut us out of your life. I promise you, on my knees, that I will never go out on the highway again. I don't know how I'll make a living yet, but believe me, I'll find a way. Just give me one chance. I beg you not to turn your back on us. You know very well that you're the only person we have close to us. I've only now realized what I can't lose. Believe me, I'm truly sorry for what I did. But I did not know how to get out of such a situation, when there is no money, sometimes even for bread. I just ask you to believe that the money I brought today, it was not earned in this way. It was given to me by a stranger who saved me from Stephen. And that man gave me a good admonition too, that if he ever sees me on the highway again, he will consider me a fallen woman. He said the right words to you. All right, baby, if you promise me it won't happen again, we'll stick together. We'll try to forget this month completely, like it never happened. Now go see your daughter. I think she's awake." Quietly spoke the old woman and stroked the girl's head. In the evening of that day, when the Evelyn players had already left, Camille thought about life. She realized that she had made a promise to the pensioner, and the girl knew that she would keep her word in any case, even if she had to starve. And at the moment, Camille was concerned with another question: where to find a part-time job. Camille spent a long time in her thoughts, and when she looked at the clock, she was surprised that already at 0:00 the young woman came to her daughter and admired the baby. Then the girl shared the bed and lay down. And at that moment, for some reason, she remembered the departure of her neighbor. Now Camille understood why Wendy had treated her so dryly. Camille decided that she had to talk to the neighbor tomorrow. 10 days passed. Camille kept her promise to Evelyn. Now when the pensioner came to Camille, the girl went to look for a job. And soon she was lucky to get a job as a dishwasher in a kindergarten. The salary was small, but Camille was happy with the money, and the schedule suited her. Another week flew by and Camille had a day off. The young woman decided to take her child for a walk at lunchtime. She had already started to get things to dress. The doorbell rang. Camille was surprised by it, as she was not expecting anyone, and especially Evelyn knew that she had a day off today and did not come these days. The girl then thought that was right. A neighbor came over to chat and hurriedly opened the door. However, it was not Wendy who turned out to be the evening, but a stranger who held a gorgeous bouquet of pink roses and a large fluffy bear. Camille looked at the man with surprise and immediately recognized him as the man who had given her money for nothing. The landlady was embarrassed to see Stephen's partner and spoke crumpled. "Hello, you must be here for the debt. How did you find me? You have a way of keeping guests on the doorstep. I'm glad you remembered me, though. That means you left a good impression of me. I'm not used to letting strangers into my home." "Oh my goodness," the man exclaimed, and then went on. "We're the ones who don't know each other. Perhaps you don't remember my name, but I remember yours perfectly well because I heard your whole conversation with Stephen. Only after I heard what that man did to you, that I did not let him do it again. My name is Christopher, by the way. I remember Stephen calling you Christopher. All right, come on in, but I'm warning you right away, I don't have the money to pay you back at the moment. And one more thing, I don't do that trade anymore. If you'd like to collect your debt in this equivalent, I gave the money freely and from the bottom of my heart. I really wanted you to stop doing this business," said the man and handed the girl flowers and a toy, and then crossed the threshold. "But I don't understand why you came to me," the young woman asked in surprise. "That's an interesting question, but I will answer you now. Initially agree that you will not call me you. Otherwise, I feel like an old man. I'm only 31 years old. Now to answer your question. When I saw you in the car, I was struck by your looks. Then I thought you'd disappear and all my thoughts of you would be gone. But as time went on, I kept thinking about you. Then I realized that Cupid's arrow had accidentally pierced my heart, and thus I stand beside you." After these words, the crying of a child was heard from the room. The young woman rushed into the room. She put the flowers and the toy on the bed and picked up her daughter in her arms. Following the mistress of the apartment followed the guest. The man looked at the little girl and softly said, "It seems to me that with a toy I hurried. You should have bought another set of rattles. Since your daughter is still a baby, you shouldn't have bought anything at all. By the way, my daughter's name is Vanessa. She's 5 months old. I forgot to ask you how you found me. Stephen gave me a beautiful name. He gave me the street, the house, the entrance. I had to find the apartment on my own." "Very interesting. Can you tell me why Stephen is a trucker? I mean, his father's not a poor man." "I'd be happy to share. He told me why it happened. But first I'd like you to offer me a seat. That's what hospitable hostesses usually do," the man said with a smile. The young woman hummed with embarrassment and offered the guest a chair while she sat down on the bed with the baby. The girl turned to Christopher and looked questioningly at the man. The guest realized that he was expected to answer, and so began his story from the narration of the new acquaintance. The landlady learned that Stephen's father's business had failed and had to take a large loan from the bank to restore his own business. However, the finances did not help. Eventually, the business went bust, and there was a debt to the bank. And then it was decided to sell Stephen's apartment to pay off the debt. The young man's father could not bear it all and died suddenly. Stephen was left without money for life, and he had nothing to pay for his studies at the institute. So the guy dropped out of college and got a job as a trucker. Christopher told all this while looking at Camille, who was listening attentively. When the man finished the story, the girl smiled mysteriously, which did not hide from the guest, and he asked, "You must be gloating." "Not at all. I just think that Stephen will now understand how to live on a simple salary and not boast about daddy's money." "You're right about that. Stephen is the sole earner in the family now, since his mother never worked after marrying his father. And from what I understand, my partner's mom isn't going to do it. But I'm not interested in that anymore." "Me neither. We were gonna go for a walk. Go with the duck. You won't mind that. So you're gonna tell me about yourself." And soon the couple and the baby were walking in the park. Christopher told the girl he lived in a one-room apartment. He has been working as a trucker for 6 years. He likes this occupation, and also said that he was married. But the family life did not work out. He said that he likes to guess Japanese crossword puzzles and dreams of visiting the Northern Territory in the future. Hearing the man's last wish, Camille laughed and said, "Everyone wants to go to the South, but you want to go to the North. You are strange. It's very simple. My parents are from there, and they often talk about it. If only you could hear how enthusiastically my mother and father describe the North. Why am I telling you this now? I'll get to know them. You'll hear it firsthand. What makes you think I'm going to meet them? Wait a minute. Don't be so quick to say no. It's not like I'm asking you to get into bed. I just want to start by courting you. And if everything turns out well, then we can create a family with you in the future." From the lack of the young man, with a laugh uttered Camille. The couple walked with the child for a while, and then Christopher walked the girl home, helped her carry the stroller to the 3rd floor, and at parting asked permission to call and visit. The girl responded to the young man with consent. A month passed as Christopher visited Camille for the first time. During this time, the couple met several times. They often called each other. The man always inquired about Vanessa's accomplishments to the young woman at each call. It was a pleasure. It didn't take long to fly by. Another month, Camille came home from work and was surprised to hear someone in her apartment speaking in a man's voice. She listened and recognized Christopher's voice. The girl went into the room and saw the man talking sweetly with Evelyn. The old woman saw the girl and said with a smile that Camille had come to visit them. Camille looked at Christopher with surprise And he immediately knelt down on one knee in front of Camille, took out a small box from the pocket of his jeans, which he opened and handed to the girl with the words, "Here I am making you a marriage proposal. I met Evelyn without your permission and told this worthy woman how I love you. She said she would bless us only after you gave your consent. Now my fate is in your hands." Camille looked at Evelyn, confused initially, and then shifted her gaze to the man. The girl took a box from which she pulled out a thin wedding ring. She slipped the piece of jewelry onto her finger and admired it, taking her hand aside, then looked at Christopher again and asked quietly, "What about my job at the track? That's what you gave me, isn't it? You're going to remind me of that someday, aren't you? What kind of nonsense are you talking about? I believe I met you in a more romantic setting, like the day I first walked into this apartment. Make it look like I got the wrong address. And by the way, Stephen is no longer my partner. I asked management to do that, and they'd gone along with it. Now I have a partner who's not considered for the girls. He's a model family man. That's what I'm going to be. As soon as you say yes, what can I tell you? Naturally, I say I want to be your wife," the girl said happily. And at the same moment she found herself in the arms of a man. Christopher tenderly kissed the young woman and quietly in her ear said, "You have now made me with the happiest person. I love you madly, and I will never hurt you or Anya. I will do everything possible so that you do not need anything. We will be a model family. And now you can't refuse to meet your relatives, who already know about you and are eagerly waiting for me to introduce you to them. I understand that you are preparing me to talk to my father and mother about the wonderful northern region, as well as hinting that we will have a joint trip to those lands. That's a good point. And you are not only beautiful, but also smart." Laughing, Christopher replied and kissed the young woman on the lips.